The camera's on, right?
It is now.
Okay. So good evening. This is the November 9th, 2017 Board of Education meeting. The board met for half an hour in executive session. And we are now moving into our regular meeting. So the approval of minutes for October 12th and October 24th. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any issues with either one of those meetings? No? Okay. Roll call. Sean?
Yes.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Aida?
Yes. Okay, moving into 2.1, communications. We have a letter from James Locke dated October 31st, 2017. That will be it for records. And then community comments. I'd like to recognize members of the audience. If anybody would like to address the board, this is your opportunity to do so.
Well, Eli's in Spain.
Oh, is that where
Oh, that's
he
right.
is?
That's why he didn't respond to my text.
That's right.
Oh. And I'd like to ask members of the audience, if you haven't signed in, there's a steno pad over there. If you make sure you list your name in there, that would be great. So the board would like to acknowledge the fact that it's our superintendent's birthday
Thank you.
today.
Today I'm 24. Record state.
Is that your favorite?
Put that in the minutes.
age?
No, it's, you know.
Don't be one of those
That's
people.
right.
Be happy that you're still here. Be proud
Right.
of what you are.
Good
That's
point.
your gift. There you go.
Good gift, yeah.
Sage advice from your board.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so in honor of your birthday, Mario.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Oh, no.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Mario. Happy birthday to you.
Cha cha cha.
Thank you.
That wasn't bad.
No, I think we should take it.
That was on camera,
You
right?
must take that on the road. Take it on the road.
All right, we're going to go into schools in action. We have a presentation from our engineering.
This is Steve Blything, and should I introduce you?
Sure.
Steve is our engineering teacher. He works technically for the Green Career Center, and but he's definitely a full-on member of Yellow Springs High School faculty and team. And so Steve's just going to talk a lot about the work he's doing as our latest satellite program we have at Yellow Springs Schools, and it's been a great success. And just talk about some of the work. So I will just give me a nod, and then I'll flip. So Steve Blything.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Appreciate the invitation. Again, I came here last year, and we started an engineering program from the ground up. I've taught for 15 years as originally before I came here, and we've been doing a lot of really interesting things. And I wanted to share with you some of the projects we've been doing. Go ahead, flip. Oh, thanks. Okay, so 3 projects I picked out, few PBLs that we've done. Compact furniture design, we did some engineering wall art, and laser engraved fundraiser. So just for an overview, we decided there was a need for furniture in the building for students to use for a variety of purposes. There were plenty of locations in the entire district that could use a table or chairs, so that students could, when provided opportunity, use these areas as extended learning spaces to study or plan for their busy schedules, and perhaps even eat lunch when the cafeteria is full. Problems in getting this furniture included cost, size, fire codes, availability of the ideal fit. We believe that young student engineers could solve this problem. The following examples were shown to students to help prime the pump and generate ideas. A nesting table idea, a fold-away sort of picnic table, so things that could be put away. A nesting table chair combo, and a nook design. A folding picture that turns into a table. A combo shelf, a fold down shelf idea, or a simple shelf, and another version of a simple shelf. So those were given to students to prime the pump to get them ideas about what we were looking for exactly. And so we used the driving question, how can we as student design engineers design, build, and test quality compact furniture to best serve the needs of the school community. I have many learning targets that are very friendly for furniture design, including the engineering design process, sketching, CAD design, and material selection. Also, measurement, layout, planning of machining operation, cutting of a board, drilling, site safety, and safety is a premier of premier importance when we have children working in the wood shop, of course. And your skill-based learning targets include collaboration, presentation, critique, creating solutions to real-world problems, designing products that fit the customer need, demonstrating good work ethics through cooperative learning and professionalism.
So can I jump in real quick, Steve? I want to share that these things that he's just shared with you, a lot of what he's shared already, these are things that our teachers all put on a common slideshow that we do every time we do on late Wednesdays, we do our tuning presentation for our projects. So just kind of just want to share that's one of the things that we share every time. So.
Absolutely. Okay, so we used a few different hook activities. The 8th grade students engaged in brainstorming ideas and participated in several mock-ups and prototypes of their designs, including CAD software and cardboard mock-ups. We didn't have the 3D printers in place at the time, and we did a couple of them on 3D printers just to show that we could do it, but we have them now for this year's project. By the way, I do teach the entire 8th grade. I have all 8th graders on D-days, which is nice. So all the 8th grade got to be involved with this project. Also, I didn't mention Mrs. Materney. We co-op teach this, and so in her art classes we also had full periods to work on the furniture, so that we had double the time, the class time to work on. So the need to knows that drive the learning through the project included safety being the #1 priority, both in the makerspace and in the final product. We didn't want to put anything unsafe in our hallways. What should a compact furniture design include, and how do we build it? Given that we have so many groups, how do we determine the appropriate spaces to use for installation of furniture? So we try to map out the best zones where there was a need. Okay. This is an example design process, and what I like about it is, #1, it kind of mimics the scientific method, but there are also points built in, natural points for critiquing. So at every step along the way, you can have a critique, either a formal or informal, and decide, do we need to back up? Are we developing the proper solution to the problem? Is our prototype valid? And then we evaluate. So it has built-in steps for critique and reevaluation. For the first step, defining the problem on the sample engineering design process, we had the students fill out a design brief. It's very similar to a customer order, where we identify certain parameters. Then the students brainstorm to generate concepts where wild ideas are encouraged, and to get as many ideas written down in a certain period of time. And then we use a decision matrix to kind of sort of vote, and it takes the emotionalism out of it, I guess, at some point, to help them decide on a topic. And then they work on developing their solutions. They start with hand-drawn sketches, and then proceed to CAD modeling. We have some nice photos here. Flip through these.
And Mary?
Hiding behind a computer. And then we go to cardboard mock-ups.
Those were cool when they were
We had a lot of cardboard. Okay, and then they began construction of the makerspace.
Yeah, it's important for folks to know who don't know this at home that these makerspace tables were actually part of a former PBL project, which was a miniature golf course that the kids took apart to build the tables that are in the makerspace. So everything in the makerspace was created by the kids, 100%.
Absolutely. So there are several photos here of kids using the makerspace. This is one of my favorites because he's not looking at the solid.
Yeah, Mario just actually had a small culinary episode.
His eyes are protected,
You can see
so.
the blade's not actually spinning there. He was pretending to use it at that point, but yeah, I told him to look down and he wanted to look at the camera. I'm sorry, please. Okay, and there's a few more few more of those.
I'm just happy there's a guard on it.
Is that right? I'm not sure what that picture was. And so yeah, I think one more. Okay, and then they got to their final product. This was pre-installation. That was when I took most of these. They're also mostly of my first period because after first period I forget to take pictures apparently.
Dabbing? Somebody dabbing over there?
Yeah, I got them.
Craig?
And whenever possible, I got them with their cardboard mock-ups to show the similarity. Okay, so then we moved on to evaluating our solution. We were actually able to display 23 of 27 pieces. Truthfully, that did exceed my personal expectations. 2 designs failed in part due to lack of receptiveness to feedback. They were absolutely sure of the outcome, and we live by the belief that it's okay to fail. If you're absolutely sure that this is the way it's going to be, then you have the right to try it as long as it's safe and so they have the right to give it a shot. And so some of the designs just did not work. One failed due to weight issues. It was too heavy to mount. And one had group dynamic failures that prevented completion. But those are real life problems, real world situations. Work will be displayed in the halls for student. It is displayed in the halls for student use. It was presented last May at Exhibition Night. Some other projects. The wall murals. I'm incredibly proud of the job they did on the wall murals in my design class. And go ahead and flip it here. This is the preliminary stages. Had groups of 5, so they were fairly large, but I had so many wall spaces that I wanted covered. Yeah, I just have pictures of the finished product for most of these, or semi-finished. So I didn't copyright the steam or anything like that, but they do spell out our steam across the wall. It's I think that was a nice touch. So the art one came back. I'm sorry, this one was already there, and I just incorporated that when we did the layout because I liked it. It has some nice design features that we actually use in our design class, and so I can point to it and point out repetition and and things like that.
So our steam is is the R robotic?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And this is something we came up with on the fly there. Okay. And this was a senior group
wow,
project.
nice.
They did that. And we made these by projecting with the old-fashioned projectors on the wall. We took their design and photocopied it onto film, and then projected it up on the wall, and they traced it in pencil and then painted it in. So I think it was a good experience for them. That one is now done. It wasn't quite done. Also, we did a DC fundraiser with the laser engraver last year. Dr. Cryer helped me come up with that idea. And last year we did a Thanksgiving theme. This year we're doing a winter theme. And these are just some examples from the Thanksgiving project last year. We sell the tiles for $5 a piece, all proceeds, 100% profit. The tiles cost about 8 cents a piece. I just donate those. And so everything they sell goes to their DC trip. We were able to, it's on the future slide, go ahead. Enjoy the pictures here.
The tiles are metal
They are
or ceramic?
ceramic tiles.
Ceramic tile.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And
The
did
students, sorry.
they sell them all?
Not all of them. I have maybe 20 of them left in my room, and we'll try to sell them this year at our exhibition night in the fall.
Perfect gift for grandpa and grandma.
Yes, absolutely.
These
Absolutely.
are something this year, or that's last year too, okay?
Yeah, we are doing them this year also.
Right.
We're doing a winter theme, and I told them if they wanted to do a holiday theme, that's great. Anything their design, so they can do any winter theme or winter idea they choose. And so we were able to raise over $700 for the DC trip last year, and should match or exceed that this year. The tiles will be for sale at this year's exhibition night. Thank you very much for
Wow.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Appreciate
Any
your
questions?
Can you just remind us, the furniture project, how long from beginning to sitting in the seat?
Well, I'm guessing about 3 months.
3 months.
I could tell you more exactly if I went back through my
Mm-hmm.
my lessons from last year, but it took a good amount of time, and you saw most of the pictures they had coats on. We were
Yeah.
in the makerspace in the middle of winter, so we had the heat on, and it was quite cool out there. But
So that's really, I mean, that's a long term, they have to be at this for a good while.
yeah, and we went through all the phases of the design process. I mean, that's everything from brainstorming through finished product.
Yeah.
So there was quite a bit to it. But I really impressed with how quality-minded the kids were. They really wanted to put something nice out there, and it was disheartening for the ones that couldn't display. But that's part of the process.
Right.
So besides being disheartening, I mean, can you just share a little bit about that experience with those kids? Because obviously they take ownership and pride in doing that,
Sure.
and they're pretty sure it's going to work, otherwise they're going to stay attached to it.
Well,
So yeah, just.
I could show you specific pictures, but
That's okay.
there was one of the tables that folded out, and it had an island down the middle that it stood on, and when it folded out, it was too narrow at the base. So I asked them to narrow or to widen the base and make it more sturdy so that it could go in that way. And they, no, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be fine. And it just didn't. Another reason they decided not to widen the base is because they were having issues with their hinges. The way they were applied, they just wouldn't stay. So you can't put something with sharp edges where the metal hinges are gonna come loose. So it had multiple issues. There was another shelf design that all the weight was supported with this one narrow little bridge going out to a fold-up table design. Neat concept with lightweight plastic, it probably would work, but with wood, it wasn't going to hold it. And so I alerted him to it. I tried to talk him into it, and I guess the leader of the group was not interested in changing the design. Was adamant that it was going to work, and so with cardboard it worked. And when you do the mock-ups, it works, but then you add the weight, and it just didn't work anymore. So
how they handle or process it in the end when it didn't work as a finished product?
There were a lot of places to earn points up to that, the finished product not working. So it was a minor deduction on their grade that it actually didn't work because they did go through the process and that. But there was some deduction involved for sure. But how did they handle it? Nobody came to me crying. So, it was, there's some internal disappointment, and but I explained to them along the way it's part of the process. It's you take a risk and you fail, and you still learn something.
So I just, when I was watching, I saw a TEDx Dayton talk recently in which it was actually a Yellow Springs graduate from like the early 2000s, and it was about a bringing back shop class.
Okay.
And this incredible, rich, hands-on learning experience. And like this is sort of the 21st century shop, going beyond shopping, in fact.
Absolutely.
But, so I feel really fortunate that it is back. It's back in the makerspace. It's back in the learning that you're providing this experience. And is it something that is common to many districts, or are we just fortunate right now that Yellow Springs is committed to this? And just out of curiosity, is shopping coming back?
I think it's coming
under
back
another
in terms of
name?
makerspace concept. So makerspaces are flying up all over the place. Maker fairs, it's sort of becoming a real popular thing in popular culture in general. We like it because it connects very well with some of our deeper learning PBL kind of philosophy. And you can see what Steve's talking about really are purely engineering practices and design thinking processes, not necessarily PBL, but they sound very much similar to some of the work we're doing with project-based learning because it's very much the same thing in many ways. So it gels really well.
Well, and I feel obligated to say, this partnership brought to you by the Greene County Career Center. So that's that's what's helping to make this possible.
Are you working with other schools too, or is it just a partnership really with the Career Center and Yellow Springs, or?
Because this is happening in a lot of schools. The Career Center, I'm sure, does.
Well, the Career Center has an enormous number now of satellite programs in all the 7 districts in the county. I don't know if there's
But this
another
particular
version
engineering.
of this kind of engineering
Beaver
program.
Creek added 3 this year in
Beaver
the
Creek
middle
did.
school, and
Okay.
there was one at Xenia and then one for everyone.
So I think what's different is we're doing it in a transdisciplinary way, whereas other schools aren't necessarily.
I agree.
So, is that right, Steve? I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. The biggest barrier to the PBLs that I faced previously coming here was just being able to be cross-curricular, and we do an outstanding job of that here.
Yeah, so because of our cross-curricular sort of leanings around some of the work we're doing with project-based learning, makes it easier. So what Steve does is he can connect to projects already happening and support those projects in ways that are much more rich and deep than we've really done before. And so it's pretty, the partnership has been really great and powerful.
That's great.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
So how high is your highest class right now that you're teaching this year?
9 through
In
12.
terms of the oldest kids and what's, because I know that the first year we were teaching some intro classes, and then at some point they'll get to the top class that's offered.
Next year, we're looking to add 1 or 2 more classes. We considered robotics, architecture, aerospace. There's several choices, and it's really up to you guys where we want to go with what we add.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of share that because that's important to note that our older kids will be able to have exposure to more and more higher level engineering classes, including robotics, which is something we can really do. Pretty powerful.
For sure.
If I could take 60 seconds. Steve and Don Boyer and I presented to introduce the Engineering Internship. So we had an informational meeting today. The turnout was okay. It was during academic lab, so some kids were already called. But we introduced it, and and just as a reminder, it's at Trent Fisher's place, who's the Yellow Springs guy and family here, and he owns a company called SAS Automation, and they make end-of-arm tooling for robots. So we've gone out. Steve's gone out to his place a couple times to sort of see what they're doing. So we hope to be starting within maybe about 2 weeks or so with our first pair of interns working out there, and they'll work for a quarter, anywhere from 1 to 2 afternoon, evenings a week. And then we'll replace them with 2 more interns at the third quarter and the fourth quarter. And then they'll be building those food trikes in Steve's class as well. So a lot going on, really a lot of funky stuff.
Good. Great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Laptop with every presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
All right, moving on to the treasurer's report, please.
I don't have very much to talk about. We received our third quarter income tax payment, and it was 8.7% higher than last October. If you want to look at past Octobers, I put the spreadsheet in at the end of the packet, like I always do, to show you our history for the income tax. It was occurring to me the other day that we are in our last year of our contract with Sodexo. So we have to do an RFP that's about an inch thick. Last time I worked with Sodexo and some other school districts on how we put that together, so we'll have to start that process again. And last time, I don't remember exactly how many bids we got. It seemed like it was only
2.
2. It just doesn't seem right, and so we'll do the same thing this time. And then we'll probably start that process soon so that we have everything in order by summer so that we can start off the next year with whomever we choose to.
I was going to comment on that just for a second. I was thinking about it when I read this, our strategic plan, and kind of the health and wellness focus. And so I was just going to say that maybe kind of in developing that RFP, kind of take a look at that section and see how they line up in supporting, in creating an RFP that really kind of supports those priorities. That's just some feedback.
It seemed like we made the changes, like our fruit and veggie bar and some of the other things that we have.
I know, I remember doing it 5 years ago, where they even made, they were going to try and buy more local, and they were going to try and do some things. Yeah, so that was some thoughts.
Okay, and then I invested some money. The interest rates weren't great compared to some of the rates we're getting right now, like the Max Saver Plus. That's at 1.24%. That is a liquid account that I can move money in and out of. My money market account is at 0.91%. And then the CDs that I got were one for 2 years at 1.75%, and then one at 1.5 years for 1.5%, so the rates aren't great, but I can get better rates if I go out more years. I'm just not going to do that. I mean, rates seem to be improving, so I'm just trying to do the best investing I can short term and turn that money over and reinvest it at higher dollar amounts or higher percentages, which I have been able to do so far. So, and then our YSE grants that I deposited this month we had a book request by teacher Maggie Davis for $533, puppeteering from Elizabeth Simon for $2,000, and then we received a Charlotte Drake grant for a chess club. And I don't want to put Matt on the spot. I don't know if you know anything about Maggie's book request.
Yeah, it's so Maggie Davis is teaching language arts as well as science this year, and language arts is a new subject for her this year. And she was filling out her library with some books that are mostly focused on like diversity and cultural sensitivity, and there's like a theme across these books that she really wants to address with her 5th graders. And I don't know the titles, but you know that's the flavor of it. She was very interested in these specific titles for not just the language arts benefit, but also some more of the learning about the community and things like that. So.
And then I already talked to Dr. Fryer about his 2 grants, so.
Yeah, so Elizabeth Simon is being a part with the theater program that's offered for middle school as one of the electives, and so they're creating these giant, basically bucket heads that are mythological creatures that are taking multiple components and themes from various myths from all across the world and creating these creatures. They've been doing a number of field trips in terms of trying to learn more about puppeteering, including remember the puppeteers at TEDx? Zoom Theater, yeah. So they work with them, and so they've got some great experts to work with as well. The chess club is a student-run piece, a senior project, and so those are purchasing chessboards that were portable ones you can roll up, but actually good ones that would unroll when you use them. So they're actually really excited. It's another option during academic lab, other than quiet study hall or collaborative study hall are being called by teachers.
Concludes my report.
Yeah. Well, thank you to YSEE always for supporting the work here at the schools. It's really important. I think when we do our development report, which I can't remember if that's quarterly or not, but
it was going to be this month, but
okay.
due to us talking facilities, I think it's we just delayed it until next month.
It would be interesting to see just like if as we work towards building a culture of philanthropy within the district, if we're seeing more proposals going forward, whether they're even funded or not, but like we're still really kind of seeing, ultimately we're seeing an increase in funded proposals, but like how that building the culture piece is going, which is a little harder, to measure, but and it's still way too early, I would say, but just sort of like how's it going?
We have some anecdotal, feedback on that right now. If you want to hear it, I think
you could say for the report. I just wanted to kind of just put it out there. Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, moving on to the superintendent's report.
Okay, so I think I'm going to start, one of the things that, so last month we talked a little bit about we brought up the idea about our annual report that we give to the community, quality profile, and we did a second quality profile and talked a little bit about why we in Yellow Springs believe that it's important to measure things that we think we value, and that's really around the whole child, not just the pure academic one-shot bubble test measure that you see from the state report card that we're reporting on today. But I think it's important, the paper I think reported on today, I haven't had a chance to read the article yet, but I did contribute a little bit to I think what Carol wrote ultimately. But I think it's important also to share the report card a little bit with the Board of Education and the good, the bad, and everything that we have going for us in totality. What I want to sort of preface this with, I think is pretty important, is this is one measurement, one of many, I think. And every time we have people come and visit our schools, and we just had them just yesterday, in fact, we talk a little bit about Yellow Springs and our sort of approach to things and how we have a philosophy of, Steve said, kind of failing forward and learning from mistakes and trying to get better with it. The culture around standardized testing in the state is the opposite culture of failing forward. It's a gotcha culture. It's a let's rank order schools and then shame them publicly by getting newspapers locally to report on them. And by getting a community then to put pressure on school boards and teachers to do better on these standardized test scores and continue to chase the system that the state chooses to purport and push. And so we have chosen consciously to really think differently about that system. And so I want to share it, but I got to be honest with you, I'm a little reticent to do so, not because the data is not great, but more because I think we are playing right into the hand of those who believe that this is the be-all, end-all measurement for schools. And my concern is that maybe we're not thinking deeply enough about what really matters. And so I think it's important to really consider that. So that being the case, these are the test results from the state of Ohio, and I will kind of share. Before I share these, let me share what I think is a pretty interesting. Hope I can pull it up. No, I can't. I had it a minute ago. Okay. Well, hang on 1 second here. Let me pull up. Well, let me pull up my email here because I think it's important enough to show this particular piece. And then I will. It'll come up pretty quickly here. Hang on 1 second. I apologize. It was here before I plugged my computer in, and now it's gone. And so, but I do think it's important and worth sharing because it sort of shares the obvious concern, particularly with this year's state assessment versus other years. Oh, thanks, Matt. So, hopefully it'll show up right. No, it's not showing up. That's huge. So this is a measure called performance index, and I don't know if it was reported on in the article. It may have been reported on. This is our performance index in Yellow Springs, and the history of the performance index, which started in 2001, exactly the same time as George Bush's No Child Left Behind got in effect. And so you can see our performance index way back in 2001 and how it has improved steadily. Now this graph makes it look incredible in terms of progress, but really if you just take the first 4 years, it's really only looking from 78 to 95, so it's not a significant, huge gap there. But you can see it grew over years, and then it kind of was steady for years. And then something happened in 2015. Now, to the layperson's eye, they might say, what happened? Those schools really messed up that year in 2015 as they went down so hard, and the scores were terrible, they dropped. But what you would notice if you did your research is that in 2015, for the first time ever, we switched to a brand new testing model. Well, we've done it before, but we switched to a brand new test called the PARCC test, which are these common core state tests. And so we changed the entire test that kids took, and the system changed radically at that point. And so there was sort of a resetting of the norm, if you will, at that point of what our scores might be in Yellow Springs. Well, the following year, we switched again and went to a combination of PARCC tests and air tests, because if you remember then, there was a lot of pressure against Common Core nationally, and that's why I think part of the reason we went down, at least maybe not every reason. And then you can see from 2016 to 2017, we saw a rise, but we went then from the PARCC/air to all air tests. And actually, I think air tests are more challenging than the PARCC tests, in my opinion, and that's a big reason, I think, for the drop-off from 87 to 81. But consequently, we did improve in those 2 years. I want to share that even though the state doesn't talk about this and publicize it very much, if students choose to conscientiously not take a test or opt out of testing, which we had a few kids who did that in Yellow Springs, and maybe who did it in more than one test. So if you have a student who's taking 4 of these tests and they opt out, that means all 4 of their test scores report as zeros. And they did not remove them from the rolls. So when the state has these numbers, they include the zeros that kids who opted out of that test took that test.
Well, and these are really parents who are opting out for their children.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so I'm not making a judgment one way or another on that, but I just think it's an important piece of the data that folks maybe don't hear. The other thing I know from this year's tests, I think that affect performance index at least, is we know we had, I think, at least one kid, I think there were two, that had a medical reason they requested, they couldn't take the test for varying reasons that I can't get into publicly. But they were also given zeros. The waiver was rejected essentially by the state of Ohio, and those students then received scores of 0 as well. Further, there was a student who we know was a biology student who is taking advanced AP high-level biology, but there was some confusion discussions between us and the state about what should count and what shouldn't count, and whether that student had to take it. We were under the understanding that student didn't have to take it. Then the state said, well, actually they do, and therefore you get a 0 for that student not taking as well. And so things like that, that's 4 kids, 5 kids, maybe not a big deal in most districts, but in a district like ours, as small as we are, it does have at least some level of an effect on this final performance. But really the only reason I'm showing you this is to just show the variability and what happens when you switch from one test to another test within a year's time.
But how can you even compare? I mean, it's apples and oranges, right?
That's exactly my point. You hit the nail on the head. So my suggestion is that it's exceptionally difficult to compare from one year to the next. And so we have this grade called value added, which is, where's it at here? Progress grades. And so, you know, you can see our progress grade component is a C. I suppose that's an average. That means we progressed a year every year in theory. But value added is essentially comparing test scores over a 3-year time period. And we've already shared with you that over the last 3 years, we've had significantly different tests that kids have taken. But somehow the state, in their infinite wisdom, has found a way to, with psychometricians, to make it work statistically so that they know the exact cut score, the exact way kids grew, and it's complicated. But I think they're suggesting that they know how this works. So that's a factor for sure, and at least a question mark when it comes to value added. So I want to point out, I'm not going to shy away from the F we got. I think that's an important thing to talk about and point out here. So we got an F in indicators. I want to share with you, though, that we have good company. Approximately 80% of the state school districts got Fs on their indicators. And so we got really done really quick in the state of Ohio with our kids. You know, suddenly our instruction went way down the drain. We did terrible with kids. And in 1 year, we went from A's and excellent schools to failures in terms of passing tests. And you know, the truth is, that's obviously not true. When 80% of schools across the state fail this test, when 90% of school districts got either a D or an F, 90% of school districts, think about that for a minute, in the state of Ohio got either a D or an F on indicators met. 90%. If that happens in a classroom, think about it. If you have a child who gets an F on a test, or if you have a child who's taking a class and they're taking biology, and at the end of the biology semester they got an F in the class, and you find out about it, you're a concerned parent, right? Because my child got an F in biology. Well, when you find out that 90% of the kids in that class also got an F, is the problem the kid, your child, or is the problem the assessments and how we were giving that child the grades? Well, most parents would say, clearly it's not just my child, we need to look deeper into this and see what happened. Well, the state hasn't owned this yet, frankly. They don't own what happened with these tests, and they have not owned the fact that 90% have gotten D's and F's. If you look at their state report card, you can't find anywhere on their website an explanation about why 90% got an E and an F. And I haven't read the report of the Yellow Springs News, but I would hope that the Yellow Springs News pointed that out in their report, because that would be a glaring miss if they didn't include that in their report, and not including the full story about what happened. I'm sure it's in there though. So I want to give them full credit because I'm sure it's in there. Okay, so achievements. So overall, we ended up with a C in the component grade, and I got to be honest with you, I tried hard to research exactly how they calculate some of these. It's really complicated and confusing. The state superintendent and a lot of people are scrambling now statewide since this latest round of report cards came out to change from a grading scale now back to the former scale, because I think they're starting to recognize what has happened, I think, as a result of this in communities, and there's been a lot of outrage statewide. specifically this year around test scores. I shared with you previously the Prepared for Success, how we have one of the lowest, I think only less than 12% I think of our kids need any kind of remedial work when they go to the college and university level in English 101 or math, and that's among the highest in the state. And so I contend that really at the end of the day, what's really important is how are kids doing when they leave Yellow Springs, right? I want to know what they're doing when they go to college. I want to know what they're doing for life success. If they don't go to college, are they gainfully employed? Do they have a trade? What are they doing to contribute after high school and hopefully going to college and then after college? And so this is a pretty good indicator. The other that we're preparing our kids when they graduate. Now that's a grade of a B. I have to tell you that grade of a B is #1 in Greene County. And there were very few A's across the state in Prepared for Success in a lot of these categories. Our graduation rate is great, obviously. We've graduated 100% 2 years in a row. So they look at your 4-year graduation rate and your 5-year graduation rate. And while you would think this would be a really easy thing to calculate, it's actually quite complicated too. There's a significant math problem in terms of how they do that. Gap closing is definitely a concern of mine, and we're going to take a little bit more of a look at this in that it looks at our kids against a benchmark. So right now it says that kids have to get 74% passing in reading based on subgroups to pass or to count positively towards this gap closing. And so we have, I think, 5 subgroups that have more than 30 students in them. Most of those subgroups have exactly 30 kids or 35 kids. So the state sort of believes that an effect size of 30 or more is enough to report on and valid in that way. And so so this was another poor piece of data, poor scoring for us. K-3 literacy is a B grade, but I'm going to kind of unmask this one a little bit. We did really well on this one as well. But I think it's important to note that last year on K-3 literacy, what did we end up with, Matt? It was a D.
Might have been an F. I think it was a D.
It was almost an F, I think. But the thing we noticed on K-3 literacy, when we looked deeper into it, it's based on what's called RIMPs, or reading improvement plans. And so districts have to, and it's all about the 3rd grade reading guarantee. And so some folks don't know, but kids are required to pass a 3rd grade reading test in 3rd grade before moving on to 4th grade. And if they don't pass it, they're required to be retained in 3rd grade. Well, we've found ways to make it work for us, and the law has since loosened a little bit on that, so that our kids can still move on. And then they've actually changed the assessment. So you don't just have to get a certain score or 3rd grade on this test. You can get it on some of the other assessments we do, like STAR Reading and STAR Math, that we think are more valid and they measure better what our kids are doing. But the reason I think this is important is, so depending on how many kids were put on reading improvement plans at the school, and which kids were put on reading, so let's say we put 5 kids on the reading improvement plan in Yellow Springs schools, and the reason we did it was we felt like these are kids who were really high needs, they really need more support, and we needed to make sure that they were on these reading improvement plans. The problem with that is it tracks them pretty well, and if you don't, it really triggers that retention issue, I think, over time. And so the districts who do really well with this are the districts who over-RIMP. In other words, they over-give reading improvement plans because they know those kids are going to be successful by the time they get to 3rd grade, and then they boast an 80% success rate or 90% success rate on RIMP plans, and then voila, you have an A. And so it's really kind of fascinating to see how the system works and how folks learn to kind of address that. Matt,
I think there's another issue with the way that they do K-3 literacy for K-2, which is you can't measure from the beginning of the year to the end of the school year. You measure someone at the beginning of their 1st grade year, and then they come back in at the beginning of their 2nd grade year, and you have to give an assessment before September 30th. So what happens is the progress that is made over the course of the year, which is significant, we track it and we have really good success with that. It doesn't really capture that when you come in after 3 months of summer vacation. We're getting back into the groove, and then they're taking this test again. So I think that that's a poor way to measure progress. I think that you should go from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And when we do that, I think it works out well. But there's also some other elements here where last year, when we had that poor score, it was due to some RIP plans that weren't developed because state tests didn't come back to us. Third graders take a fall test. We didn't get the results until January. There was a deadline of December to make a RIP plan. The kids that did not pass that test, some of them were on track, in other ways. They were doing, in the classroom and STAR assessments, they were doing well, but they didn't do well on that state test, which was the first year of the air test as well. So I feel like that was a bit of a, not an accurate view of what we were doing. So we've figured out, this law a little bit better, and I think also feel like we're really understanding. I feel like our kids have made progress all along, but unfortunately we're kind of doing this dance a little bit with the state. There's no guarantee law.
I'm trying to click on some. I know. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, but I've already done it. I want to show you something that I think is important. The indicator factor is worth looking at. So I guess I should point out, first of all, that Mills Lawn showed on this report card significant progress versus their scores last year. They actually grew quite a bit, and the scores from Mills Lawn School did much better. The challenge this year was actually our middle school and our high school. That's where the scores went down, that was sort of the building that was struggled the most, and I can show you kind of where all the red X's are all the way up here. It's pretty poor according to this metric. But I want to point out a couple of things, that pieces of this data that are worth sharing and spending time on. So first of all, if you look at, let's go 8th grade math here. I think it's a really interesting indicator of what you see in a lot of places on this particular document. So you can see it says 34.5% of our 8th graders passed this math test. Obviously that raises significant concerns for me as a superintendent of schools. It raises significant concerns for Tim as the principal of the school. So we said, well, why? Let's figure out what happened there that was different than previous schools. How do we compare to other schools, and that kind of thing. So this was generally one of the lower scores across the state. When you look at state average, that's still lower, I think, than the state average in terms of how we scored. And let me tell you what happened. I think this is a really interesting piece. So for us, we have 8th graders. We had something like, I think it was 55 8th graders in the class last year that are now freshmen. Of those 55 kids, I believe 24 of them took algebra or math 1, which is a 9th grade essentially class. So they were in advanced math in 8th grade. And the other 20 of them took the 8th grade math class, the regular 8th grade math class. So the kids who took math 1, they were 8th graders or advanced math, were not allowed to take the 8th grade math test that other 8th grade math kids took. In fact, they had to take the 9th grade math test, or math 1, down here. And so so this is a reporting of our kids, of 20 kids. 20 kids is the effect size of this group that got 34.5%. It doesn't say the number of kids. It doesn't say that literally 50% of our 8th graders are in advanced math and weren't counted in our 8th grade scores. They were counted in our 9th grade scores. It also doesn't say that 24 out of 25 of those kids passed that 9th grade test. So I think these are the kinds of things that are missing when you look at this. The other thing, when you look at the 9th graders, the exact same thing happened there. So our 9th grade kids would have taken, in theory, math 1, right? So we have a lot of 9th graders who are taking now advanced math. Now, were they taking math 2? Did they take the math 2 assessment, a lot of those kids?
Which kids?
The 9th graders from last year?
Yes.
So the 9th grade advanced kids then took math 2, and that's where you see 100% down here in math 2, because those were the only kids that took that math 2 assessment. So complicating, so then when you look then at the 9th grade math scores, which would be math 1, that's a combination of 8th graders and 9th graders in that data. So the other freshmen, or kids who took what would be math 2, are kids who took geometry. And so you can see geometry being pretty low here. Well, had those advanced math freshmen not taken the math 2 test, because they're in a math 2 integrated curriculum instead of what we used to do, which would be geometry, their numbers would be in these geometry numbers, and those numbers would be much higher. And so I just want to point out the clear ambiguity and issues with some of these testing, because we are in between an integrated math model right now and a very traditional math model. And so we're reporting on tests that are both algebra, geometry, algebra 2, and tests that are math 1, math 2, math 3. So it's this complex world we're in. think that's what I want to share about in terms of the indicators and that. So what kind of questions does the board have? It's just so much information. I don't want to share more than I have right now. I think I've taken up a lot of time, but is there anything specifically the board has questions about that I can clarify?
Just have one question so right, I could take this and tear it up and throw it away, because we create our own way of measuring the work that we're doing. I guess so my question would be, do these grades in any way have other impact on the district? Like they're gonna put some mandates on you, or they're gonna require something else now, or like what long-term impact do they have if they don't change?
So at this point in time,
take funding away from us?
No, at this point in time,
or is
they
it really just they're meaningless? And
I mean, we're still in the top, 25-30% across the state in terms of districts, in terms of where we are. I think the rank was in the early mid-100s, but that's out of 618 school districts across the state. So it's, we're still, doing okay, even on this system. The grades don't show it, but relatively speaking to other schools across the state.
That's more, like I'm just more curious about what, does it have any direct impact?
I don't think so. So, no, not right now. So, and I think there's a great piece of legislation right now that's got some real legs. They're calling it the deregulation bill that will ultimately really deregulate significant aspects of public education law that have been put on schools, including a lot of these test requirements. And that has been spurred specifically by this year's test results. And so you have a really bipartisan coalition across the state that's really interested in some major change around this.
So that's probably really the answer to my question then, which is now that this is out, what is cycling in thought about the changes for next year or the year after? And it's along these lines that you just described? So
they're going to remove, I think, 2 of the tests, which is not enough. They're going to do it, and there's a lot of, so the whole idea of tying teacher evaluations to test scores, student test scores, is going to go away if this law passes. There are several other factors that I think are a good step in the right direction. I don't think reducing our tests significantly is in there. I think there's some changes in how the report card will be reported, at least. So that's a positive thing, I think, in that direction. And I think if this were really an indicator of future success for kids, or canary in the coal mine for us, then I would really put a lot of stock in it. I'm not happy with the way this looks, and I just want the board to know, it doesn't mean I'm ignoring this. I'm not suggesting that. I think this is, I want to treat this for what it is. It is one piece of data which says something. I'm just not quite sure how to interpret it, given all the challenges. So.
Well, yeah, and I'll just sort of piggyback on that to say that we discussed this a little bit informally at the last Career Center meeting that I was at with 6 other board representatives, and they were all scratching their heads wondering exactly what you were supposed to do with this. I think that's really, for me, the problem with this, beyond the methodologies, the apples and oranges and so forth, is that it doesn't actually point you in a particular direction to do things, because it's a black box. The way these grades are calculated is obscure, the way the tests are arranged, who gets to take them, who doesn't, the way they're scored, it's so opaque that my fellow board members, we were all just sort of saying, well, what do you do with this? I mean, there's no real value to it in terms of thinking about how you get better.
Yeah, so
well,
I
while
agree.
ignoring it, I mean, as you said, ignoring it is not appropriate, but overly highlighting it, especially when our community has been really vocal about not valuing this for kids as the be-all, end-all, as much as valuing the direction we've been going and encouraging our administration to participate several years ago in what we thought would be the avenue in partnership with other districts to officially be waived out of this exact kind of testing. And then after engaging in that process, and it got shut down, but I mean, it wasn't shut down from within this community wanted that. So ignoring it would be a mistake, but I think overly highlighting in comparison to everything else that's going on really doesn't tell us a lot.
I wish, if we had, I think if depending on where this goes, if we feel like the whole community really wants a lot more discussion around this, I'd welcome that. I mean, I think we could have a 3-hour meeting just about this complex issue, because so much of what we do in public education is driven by that. This is the evil hegemon of schools. It really is. It is the dominant force that dictates what schools do across the country and definitely across the state of Ohio. And so it affects everything we do in schools. And so it affects, a lot of schools are doing so much based on test results. So I'll give you a couple examples, because I think this is worth sharing. There are schools right now across the state who are starting school 2 weeks early. Not because it's better for kids, not because more sunlight and summer should be shorter. They're starting school 2 weeks earlier because it's just 2 more weeks to prepare for tests. And they get an advantage over other school districts because they're starting 2 weeks earlier.
Well, you know what's in that, well, if I can I say something?
Sure.
You know, I work in Springfield and they do start 2 weeks earlier, but they wanna have less school after those tests because the kids are just kind of done after so much stress and so much
Right.
preparation that they want to have as less days after these tests too.
So I'm sure that's the reason
Yeah,
that people are saying publicly, at least for sure.
Yeah, for the Springfield, but I'm just saying, it's very hard for the kids to go on and learn after these tests.
Oh, yeah.
The other piece I think is important, so I had a group of teachers from different districts who were here just yesterday, and I said, raise your hand if your school does not allow field trips within 3 weeks of standardized testing dates, within a month. And everybody's hands are raised. I said, raise your hand if your school shuts down a month before standardized testing and basically you teach to the test and you do a buckle down book and you go through all the work and bubble testing and do practice tests and things like that. Everybody raise their hands. That's happening in schools across the state. It's not happening in Yellow Springs because we're consciously saying this is not everything. It's just a very small piece of the puzzle. And I think our teachers are super, super sensitive to this. And I think that's a really important point to make too. Our teachers are super sensitive to this. And so depending on how the community reacts, if the community feels like this is super important and something we need to do well at, we can get a school that gets A's on these. I've worked in the #1 middle school in the state of Ohio on standardized testing. I know what it takes to get A's on this work. And I don't think Yellow Springs wants to be that kind of school. Because what it takes will be significant interventions, significant different work. It would require all the things I said that folks were raising their hands to do, and then some. And so we need to make sure that we're consciously making the right choices that we think are important for our community around this and going boldly in that direction. So
I also don't think focus on this is what ends up helping the groups of students who historically struggle more than others. The way that what we are focusing on does help.
well, and the reason that in a 3-hour discussion, we could probably spend an hour talking about one thing, and that is the idea that really if we're talking about the future of education and what we want kids to be like after they graduate from college today in 2017, and what's going to lead them to the greatest amount of success, teaching to a standardized test or focusing on rote learning, memorization and rote learning is not the answer right now. In fact, there's more and more, tons of research out there. I would ask folks to look up Yang Zhao. He's this incredible writer, prolific writer, I think currently at the University of Washington, who writes extensively about this work and comparing the United States' effort to be the top tested school in the world and the race with China to be #1. When China is actually starting to try to do the exact opposite because they recognize the error of their ways with such a strong text-centered focus. And so we have to be conscious about what we're doing with our test focus in not only our community but beyond in the whole state and the country.
Well, speaking of that, it makes me wonder, because the stuff I've been reading, I mean, everybody, it's not just in Greene County, everybody's up in arms about it. I mean, the majority of school districts are up in arms about this. But what about those districts? I haven't read a whole lot about those districts who sort of did rise up and meet the demands of this. What are they saying about it? I'm just curious, because, like...
Yeah, I mean, we have one in our own community. I mean, Oakwood is one of those districts that, gotten a lot of A's, but they got some B's and C's too, I think, So even in that community, I think they got some of this. I think they would argue that they're a different kind of model than us for sure. They're traditional. I mean, I think there's a lot of research that says that socioeconomics are huge factors also in terms of test results on some of these standardized tests. Mike's actually a parent in Oakwood. I think he's got his kids go to school there, and we just talked the other day, it's a whole different model. The way they do things is radically different than Yellow Springs, and he recognizes that in many ways as a parent as well. So,
Yep, I'm just aware that I don't hear a whole lot about even those schools that are successful, about what do they feel about other districts and their relationships with other districts and how that compares.
I can only say that in my conversations with Kyle Ramey at Oakwood and folks from other communities that have schools, there's a general feeling, we're pretty universally opposed to this particular, we don't believe that this is in any way valid or reliable assessment tool. In fact, it's borders on malpractice, I think, to really promote assessments that really are this invalid, where 80% are getting Fs.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's...
Well, our
that's,
governor's going to be speaking at the OSBA convention.
he is?
Yeah. First time in a long time. So I'm really curious about that.
That'll be interesting.
How that happened.
Next week,
Yep,
stay tuned.
Monday. Well, all right.
So, I'm sorry. Any other questions about or comments about the assessment? So I want to end by saying, well, I think we'll see how this goes. I think this is 1 year, and if this continues, I think, again another year, I think we'll look more and more into it. But I don't think you take 1 year's data and you make vast judgments from it. I think you sort of think about it and you really try to reflect, find out where the challenges are, and then I think if we have 2 or 3 years of this, then maybe we can look a little deeper into it more and really maybe start thinking about what we can do differently. Even now, I think we're thinking about that a little bit. I just had a conversation with a high school teacher recently about, language arts and reading and what maybe we can do differently to even saying that do better on these assessments.
You drank the
Set you
Kool-Aid.
up, I mean, that's what they say
Well,
to do, right?
this is essentially the issue, right? I mean, so it's a fascinating challenge. So,
Sort of.
yeah, right.
I'd like to
Okay.
ask one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any pushback against this? Against this, what they're doing? Is there an organized fight back and say, I want to see your statistics and what are the long-term results? I mean, I get nervous when somebody says, well, they're not making clear how they're going to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about going to the
There's a-
school board, the state level.
There's a real strong push. I mean, Dave Estrup and I from Springfield did some cool work around this. But I think there's a big push. Like right now, that new law that they're working on is coming out of Lima, and it's getting really strong support across the state from superintendents. A lot of us are. There's a whole very strong lobbying effort where we're getting more active, and we're all talking to our congressmen and our senators and pushing for some change. We've been pushing change for a while, but the issue is we are so, education is challenging. It's hard work, and teachers work tremendously hard, and our administrators work tremendously hard. It's not in our nature to get out and politic and really try to, we spend like 99% of our time just working to help our kids grow and learn, and that is the bulk of what we do by far. And so to say that now we need to really focus on politics and really trying to advocate in a different forum is, we don't necessarily have the bandwidth within this profession to do that work. So
I would
that's a
hope our
challenge.
state board would do some of that and be.
Yeah. Slowly, yeah.
Okay,
So,
we're on to.
Yeah, right.
next piece. Wow. Okay, so this is a presentation about the facilities master plan update. So what we're going to try to talk about today with the Board of Education is a little bit about, we're going to sum up, and I'll just go straight to the agenda. Mike and I are going to work together. I guess I can stay here if you all don't mind, or we can I can stand up in front of the mic if you want me to. It's up to you. But we're going to talk a little bit about the summary of our engagement process to date. Then Mike's going to talk about all of the options that have been presented out there. And then we'll sort of review the survey results, and we'll talk about a new option, A5, and have some open discussion with the board, and then hopefully have some discussion about next steps. So, if it's all right with you, we'll go ahead and get started. So, just very quickly, so basically there are three broad options that we look at if you think about it more broadly. Each of these have several options within them that we've thought about from the very beginning. So there's obviously the option A, which would be separate facilities. K-6 at Mills Lawn, 7-12 at the high school. Option B, the K-12 at the high school idea, and then option C, the K-12 at Mills Lawn. There are lots of variations on each of these. You could do a renovation, you could do a renovation addition combination, you could do new construction, or you could have a phased plan where we start with one part of the plan first in one levy, and then a few years later we consider going back to voters for another levy to cover the rest of the project potentially. So those are sort of all the variations within each of these three options, as well as different ideas for site plans, and there's lots of different things that have been thrown out there. So, but all that's happened throughout this process, which really started in earnest with the community actively involved at the FAC 1 in March 23rd, 2017. So thus far we've had 5 community forums. 3 of those were community pulse meetings and 2 of those were community forums. And basically 5 total meetings where we engaged the community, brought in some speakers to share different ideas, and I think had time in each of those for open discussion and feedback directly from the community. I would say that the last community forum had the most amount of feedback by far, and really devoted like 80 to 90% of the meeting time was devoted strictly to feedback. And it was the largest turnout too. It was a great turnout in the high school. I know most of you were there, and really a powerful meeting with a lot of strong themes that we heard from our community repeatedly. We also had a meeting with our teachers, our staff. And we've had several meetings where we've updated our staff along the way that were much more short, 5 minutes conversations. In addition to that, we had a board meeting report in May from Mike. keep calling you Mark, I think it's his brother's name, yeah. And then we did a community survey where we had hoped to get 300 voters to take the survey. We ended up at 339, so we exceeded the initial thought and idea of where we wanted to go, and ended up at 339. Obviously there was a board work session where there were some discussions on the 13th of September. That was the one that was the day before the regularly scheduled board meeting in September. And then just yesterday we had another facility advisory committee meeting, I should say. That was our 4th facility advisory committee as well. So I would suggest that this has been a pretty good engagement process that has had at least really 9 opportunities where the community has been directly involved and engaged. 5 for the whole community, and then 4 where we had a specific committee of community representatives that came and gave us specific feedback as well. Sean?
I would even, that calendar should start even earlier in terms of the RFQ, the RFP, the narrowing, and the presentations that were here around the selection of an agency to run the process.
Yeah.
Like, so there was that sort of some other front end work that was going on in the calendar, which was an open process, so it was certainly anyone could have participated in that.
I think we said it went all the way back to October, right, of last year was the first time that we started talking about this publicly in board meetings and reporting on it every single meeting from October to today. So that's 13 months in a row we've been talking about this at public board meetings. And I think it's an important point to make, that this has been a very public process, and I think out in the open. So these are the pictures of each of these meetings, so that folks know that we actually had them. And this is everybody who went and attended. And Mike took one even last night, the one in the bottom right-hand corner, were folks that were there for the 4th Facility Advisory Committee meeting. And so you can see the sizes over time. We had a pretty good sized group in that first one, CF1. And then CF2 was about the same size, it just looked a little smaller because we were at Mills Lawn. CP, well, we don't have all of them up here, so we don't have CP1 and CP2. But CP3, the Community Pulse Meeting 3, was clearly the largest turnout. I think we said, we calculated around 150 people, more than that. Wait, how many chairs did you say you have total?
We put out, what did we say? I think 150 chairs, and then we counted, and only 4 were not filled, but there was like 15 people standing.
So there were like a good 165 villagers and community members and township members there to be part of this discussion, and that's really powerful. I think it's a sign of the engagement and interest from our community in this work, and I think we learned a lot from those meetings, and I would say I especially learned a lot from that specific meeting too. So with that in mind, that's just our process to date, and I'm going to have Mike talk a little bit about all the options that have been talked about since the beginning.
Sure. Is it okay if I speak from here?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You just tell me when to click.
I'm going to move through these rapidly, just to remind us of some of the options we've looked at in our journey along the way. Reminder that the A options were the options where both schools stayed at the separate sites. This was iteration A4, where there was the existing portion of the existing building was renovated in yellow. We have an academic expansion on the south side and potentially performing arts on the northeast. This one kept Mills Lawn where it is as a renovation project. There's B3, this was a K-12 at the high school site, where we kept a portion of the existing building and we wrapped a 7-12 academic core and a 6-12 building. We would needed to add a second gymnasium, potentially a future performing arts type space. C3, there were multiple iterations on the C plan, because the C plan, if you recall, was the most difficult for people to kind of wrap their arms around in terms of even visualizing it. This was C3, where there are 2 separate buildings. There'd be a separate elementary school sitting on the site where Mills Lawn is today, and a separate 7-12 school behind. So a K-12 campus comprised of 2 separate buildings with a public space, public green space in the middle. Next one. This shows you how that option, the C3 option, could have been phased. So we could have started with a 7-12 school first, again creating that K-12 campus right from the get-go, and then coming back with a second phase down the road and doing a replacement of Mills Lawn. Option C4 was a different diagram for a similar project where we're doing a 7-12 building here, but we're going to actually build a core to support the entire K-12 campus as part of that project in a first phase, keeping Mills Lawn, and then as the second phase, we would come back and do the academic component of the elementary school, completing the whole K-12, and conversations of keeping a portion of this building for some type of community arts center space. C5, and C4 alternate was if there was a desire to not keep that, even more of this could have been turned over to green space.
So would this have been a 2-story building, Mike?
Yes, yeah, 2-story academic core and a 1-story kind of shared services building on the back.
Okay.
C5 was a different diagram, keeping Mills Lawn in its entirety and doing a wraparound with the 7-12 as the first phase, and kind of looping and bringing the whole campus together, with the potential of a second phase being the completion of the elementary side. In this diagram, we're going to keep what we're calling a community arts center in town. Each of the C options represented an opportunity for a future of the existing high school site that might be different. We knew we'd have to keep the stadium, the athletic complex where it is. However, there would be surplus land over here, so there were conversations along the way about this is in the village, this could be developed into residential lots in some way. So that was a discussion we had along the way, and also some kind of visioning of how this could be used as a community asset and use were things we talked about.
So like as a gym, potentially an auditorium, or the community initiatives?
Correct.
Okay, so that's everything we talked about to date, right? I mean, in terms of plans. So let me go over some of the survey results that have informed our process to date. And Mike, feel free to jump in,
Sure,
anytime you want along the way. So you just threw this slide in today. So we just hot off the presses today, the final survey completion, everything, together, the final report. And so we're going to put that on our website tomorrow, so folks can see it tomorrow. I haven't had a chance to even look at the whole survey yet in terms of the the actual report, but we'll put it on tomorrow so folks can check it out and look through it however they like. So.
Who designed the questions?
I'm sorry, I don't think this is a point at which we're taking comments from outside. Maura, if you would just please.
Sure, it's the Applied Policy Research Institute from Wright State. So,
Formerly known as CUPA.
Center for Urban and Public Affairs. So, okay, so here's, so I'm just going to take a look at some of the questions that were on the survey and then go through a little bit of the responses. And this will also be shared in that report that you can kind of see. So in terms of this question specifically asks whether people would prefer a single site location combining grade K to 12 at Mills Lawn specifically, or separate school facilities at existing locations. And so you can see that 82.5% of the community preferred separate school facilities. Only 8% thought a single site at Mills Lawn was a good number. Interestingly, there is not a financial number asked on this question, and only in that, given that comment, only 8% supported it. So that's a very clear communication from the community, and I think it's clear, which is great to see that clarity from our community, and I think it's reflective of, frankly, what we've heard at a lot of the meetings we've had as well. So, so if we looked at the idea of a K-12 campus at Mills Lawn, would you be for or against this plan? So then it talks more specifically about a K-12 campus and whether people would support it. So when asked that question, 18% support that, 81.9% are against it. So another pretty clear communication from the community about having K-12 here at Mills Lawn.
Mario, I'd point out, just note that the disparity between the probablys and the definitely against.
Yes, right.
There's a urgency in your definitely's.
Yeah, 60% definitely against is a very strong statement. So then if we talked about the idea, so then we kind of expand on that idea even more and say, so let's say we put a dollar figure on that and we say it's going to cost $34 million for a K-12, and that was on the ballot, and it would cost you $26 a month for each $100,000 of assessed value, and you pay an additional 0.5% income tax on that. Would you be for or against it? So I think what I want to say is I've read and I heard from folks that took the survey that had talked publicly about this, and we weren't able to really talk much publicly about it because we wanted to make sure that there was some integrity in terms of people taking the survey and that whole piece. So, but one of the comments was that a lot of the questions were long, complicated, difficult to understand. This was, I think, the actual question. So you can see if it's written on paper, it's probably a little easier to read and understand, but ask verbally over the phone, it's a little tougher to follow, I think. But I think it was important for us to know what folks would actually, how they would feel if they had, what it would look like on a ballot. Because on a ballot, it would look very similar to this kind of language, and we wanted to know what people would say if they actually saw what the actual dollar amount was, because we want an honest feedback that was accurate. And so I think this was a good way to get that. And so clearly we had the same challenge here. 51% definitely against. That's a very strong number. 77% probably or definitely against, and 24.9% for. So this is interesting because this is actually a higher percentage than what you have on the previous question. So oddly, when you add the money to it, it was a higher percentage for. And so I unpacked why that was, and I think I have an idea. And I think it's because this question doesn't talk specifically about Mills Lawn. It talks generally about K-12 together in one location. So it doesn't say it's Mills Lawn. So that leads me to believe that there are folks, probably a greater percentage of folks who would have supported K-12 at the high school versus here. So I still don't think that number is high enough to really warrant a significant interest in that, because these numbers would be much higher if that were the case. But I think it's worth stating and communicating, I think, that publicly, that this to me is an indicator that there was probably more interest at K-12 at the high school than here, for sure. But there's still a challenge for sure for our community. This next question talks about a two-phase plan where you talk about an addition and renovation. So the idea of if you start with one school and then some years later down the road, ask the community again whether we should consider adding a second school on. There was very strong support for this idea, essentially correct my math, 84.6% for, probably for, definitely for. and 15.4% probably against or definitely against. And so, so we're starting to get a better idea, I think, of how our community feels when you start to look into this question. And then you add the dollar amount of that idea. So let's say we take that idea and we start with the high school, and we propose a plan that would cost $14 per month for each $100,000 of assessed property value, and a 0.25% income tax. Would you be for or against it? And in this case, we have 64.2% either probably for or definitely for this plan. And then you have, I guess that's 35%, 35.9% probably against or definitely against. And so again, I think this is, while the margins are more narrow, for a survey that happens before a levy committee's been formed, before any campaigning has happened, while frankly we've had a lot of strong opinions on the other side of this issue publicly talked about, I think this is a very strong number. And Mike would attest from his experience working in lots of other districts that this is a huge support number for this kind of plan, given that we haven't even started any kind of campaign at all.
And even more than the campaign, there's a lot of people who took the survey who responded to the surveyors that they were looking for more information. So I presume this is as high as it is because they were leaning for it, but they're seeking, I want to see plans, I want to see what your specific vision is. And where we're at in the process with this survey is that the specific vision hasn't been spelled out. And as part of the campaign, if the board moves forward, that information will be coming before they're heading to the ballot.
So this is then asking about the idea of what if you knew the plans for renovation in addition to existing school facilities included a public-private partnership to build a performing arts center for the school and community use included in the cost? 66.5% were either probably for or definitely for this, whereas 33.5% were probably against and definitely against. And I have to sort of clarify this question because I think it's a question that, of the whole survey, this question I think has some challenges in terms of validity. And the reason I think it does is because initially when the question was asked, the first, I think, 100 surveyors that took it, it asked if we were paid $8 more per $100,000 for a facility, would you be for it? And in that case, those results, I think midway through, showed 40% or 44% for it at that point. But when I talked to Carol about that, and she told me that was the point, that's what she put on the question, I said, well, I thought it was included in the $18 million cost. And so then we changed the question to make sure it was accurate midway through the survey. So the problem is, this number reflects the final 160 or so actually taking it with this question. The first, I don't know what that number would be, I guess about the same number, took it differently. And so that's a different result. So this is just 160 people answering this question the way you see it right now. So it's not a statistically a valid number up to 300, which is 350, which is what the other questions actually have associated with it. So I just want to make that transparent and clear that there's some questions for sure around this particular question and the responses that we got. And then you'll see what happened since then is that, in fact, as we started to do the numbers some more and look at the cost of the plan, it turns out that, in fact, doing a community performing arts center would actually cost more than $18 million anyway, which then adds even more questions to this particular question and the response. So there's certainly some concerns there relative to that. I just wanted to point that out for the board and the community public. So then this is the question about how we funded the project. So it's clear in this question that folks would prefer the project be funded through property and income tax combined. This actually came about because throughout the process, throughout the community forums and conversations I had had with several members of our community who I had talked to impassionedly and told me, Mario, I'm in a fixed income family. I live in my house that I've had for a very long time. I'm retired, and I cannot afford a levy that's pure property tax. That is something that's really just not doable for me. Can we figure out another way to fund this? And so we did some more research, and this is where we found out that we could actually fund it through income tax. And then through a combination of property and income tax, I think what that does is it sort of, it's more of an equitable distribution, I think, of the burden amongst taxpayers. So folks like me who live in town and have a house and also work full-time in a job will be paying more taxes and a higher tax burden with this than somebody who's on a fixed income and is really, it's challenging just to put it all on property tax. And so because their property may be valued at a higher rate, and that does not even come close to matching where their income level is, this would have a much more disparate impact on them, whereas if we did a combination, it would have an easier impact on their overall bottom line. So we think this is more fair and more equitable than doing it straight through property tax. And so I'm glad we asked this question, and I'm really glad that I heard this from several community members throughout the process. I think that really helped. This is a summary of everything we shared. So as you look through some of this, the K-12 at Mills Lawn were separate schools, 82.5% for separate schools. K-12 at Mills Lawn, 81.9% against the comprehensive. When you put the dollar amount of the K-12 plan and not specifying Mills Lawn, 77% against. A two-phase plan, 84.6% are for. An $18 million project as part of that first phase of that two-phase plan, with a 0.25% income tax and $14 a month on per 100,000 of assessed property valuation, 64.2% for. And again, I want to stress that that's a pretty darn good indicator of what our community is willing to support. Property tax, income tax, or combination, 64.1% combination is is clearly where folks are leaning. So that kind of sums up the results of the survey questions we asked. And again, to clarify that question about the performing arts space is really still a question mark, I think, given what I think was probably made that question a little less valid, I think, because of the number of surveyors that actually took that question. So I'll stop right there. Any questions or comments about the survey specifically from the board? Discussion.
I would like to just once again express my extreme disappointment in this survey. I feel like this was poorly put together and poorly worded and did not get at what we were trying to get at as well as it could have. And I hope that is that the name of the company that did this? From Wright State. You know, if you want to just attribute it to me, go ahead. But I think the way those questions were worded stinks in a big way, and I don't think that it was fair to impose that on the community. And I really don't, you know, I think that the numbers that we got out of it tells us some, but not everything we need to know. And I also think that question about the community center, number one, shouldn't have been in there in the first place, because that's not if the community chooses to do that, they can do that, but that's not a school function to plan, develop, raise funds for. And once it was an invalid question, it shouldn't even be in the results, it should be taken out. That's my 2 cents.
Sylvia. Just for the performing arts piece, I would say that is definitely a school need, but it's, when the leading word is community performing arts center, it sounded more like we're doing something just for the community that doesn't have to do with the schools, and I don't think that's accurate.
I agree with you there, but everything that we've looked at in terms of plans has labeled that as a, what's it called, a locally funded initiative. So if that's a locally funded initiative, even though we would be contributing towards it, I feel like it wasn't a good thing to throw in at this point. At some point, yes, we need to know more about that, but with as confusing and crazy as all those questions were, I think that was a big red herring to throw in.
And I agree it ended up unclear about which part, if included, was being paid for, and which part, if included, was then expected to be filled out privately later. It's not. Yeah.
We're not really commenting on the clunkiness or anything of the survey itself, just thinking about the results. The results and my impression in seeing this are, it sort of reinforced what we were already hearing. And that was sort of the purpose of the survey, was to really, let's make sure like what we're hearing in these other forums is, you know, is that the common theme throughout the entire community? Let's do some survey research. And the results, from my perspective, seem to really reinforce what we have been hearing throughout. I had a question, what was it? I was curious, when you went back to the stat around separate buildings, 82% separate school facilities, can you remind me when we surveyed the teachers, the results of that survey, was it like 80% one school building?
Yeah.
Just almost like, yeah.
Exact opposite.
It was the exact opposite.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, at both, I mean, I know they had different opinions about where it should be located,
Yeah.
of course, but they had like 80% wanted one facility. Just an interesting contrast of the community and then the teachers.
And I would suggest, Sean, that I think probably our teachers still feel that way. I don't think that's shifted. What has probably shifted is where they want that building. I think location's been shifting back and forth a little bit, depending on how the debate's going amongst teachers. But definitely, I think our teachers in there, and I think it's worth, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's important to know what our teachers think. These are the experts in the classroom that know what's best practice for our kids. And the experts are saying that they would prefer to be together, and that that's better for the kids. So.
Well, in here, though, it's their only other option, which is kind of troubling, is it's not separate schools or a joint site. It's separate schools or together at Mills Lawn.
Yeah.
Right.
So that is an unfortunate piece of that question.
Right, we could have added another question, but that would have been adding another question, and I think there was, this concern about making the survey even longer.
I get that, I'm just
Yeah.
saying
Yeah, for sure.
not to interpret that in a way that means they had another option that they didn't have.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it seemed like the feedback we were getting at that point in time anyway was that the preference was here and not there. And maybe once it became clear that community-wide, that was not really something the community wanted to entertain, that began to shift to the other location.
We heard at least two of the public gatherings, we heard pretty passionately from teachers and parents about the importance of keeping the K through 6 kids here. So that if there was gonna be a single campus, there was quite strong feeling that we didn't want to move the elementary school kids out to Enon Road because of all of the ways in which those kids take advantage of this location. So that's sort of how, how the thinking about that all evolved.
And just one more comment about the funding piece. So, I mean, are these the only options? I mean, there's another option. Somebody gives us $18 million, right? A generous donor. But knowing that, that's not just happening, these are the only mechanisms for funding facilities, the income tax and the property tax.
A really big mix.
Those really are our two only
And this
options.
particular balance of it too. 'Cause it
Well,
could be also-
so let me just say that while millage rates on a property tax can fluctuate in very small increments, income taxes can only fluctuate on 1/4% basis. So we couldn't move the income tax to 24% or 28%. It would either have to be 0 or 50.
2, 5, or half.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. So, and that's the way the law is structured, that's the way that works.
Yeah, and Sean, I think the answer, and maybe I should let Don answer that question.
Right, I can't think of another way, but maybe is there some other creative way that we're not thinking about? That's legal.
Well, and I think
We don't want to go there.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I've heard I've talked to probably 4 community members about that question, Sean, and some really creative ideas. Recently, I heard this idea of using Bitcoin, or creating sort of creating the equivalent of Bitcoin, but calling it, bulldog bucks, as somehow a way to essentially effectively do the same thing that you do with bonds, the bond process. So, but it's an interesting idea. And so I heard lots of creative ideas from our community and really kind of thought hard about if this is even possible. But public schools are so heavily regulated. I mean, that's evidenced by Don's financial report, where we're excited about a 1% return on our investment. Well, the only reason it's 1% is not because she's a poor treasurer in investing, because they don't let her invest any more than that, because we need to be very conservative with our money, because of the obvious reason of what happens if we do really poorly with our investments, then the public funds really are spent, and that's a disaster if that happens. So similarly, I think there's very limited uses in terms of how we fund schools. Any other questions? Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about new option A5. I'm going to have Mike discuss this, and I will say that this is sort of the newest idea. It's similar to an idea. It's going to look obviously very similar to another idea we've seen, and but I want to tell you, I think this is an idea right now that I'm sort of leaning towards, in terms of possibly making a recommendation to the Board of Education to support in a month. So I want to, before we share this with you, I want you to know that that's where I'm sort of leaning a little bit, okay? And I'll let Mike talk a little bit about this idea.
And all these are available on the website, right?
Yeah, so these are public documents. We can certainly, we have not put this out there yet, but we can certainly put it out there.
But all of the
Every other.
all the other, everything's on the
that's been on the
website.
website.
They've been put out there, so we
It's been
can,
out there.
but I actually think this is good to get this out there too, so, publicly.
Okay, option A5, so this is a 712 project out on Eden Road. And this is a hybrid solution, which is an addition and a renovation project. And this is an aerial view of the campus, and Eden Road is right out here in front. And by hybrid, what I'm referring to, it's a partial abatement.
Yeah, thanks.
That's awesome. A partial abatement and demolition and reuse. So we look at the structure and say, okay, what are the kind of the redeeming portions of that building that could be saved? So the 2002 edition that you see here on the west side of the building, you're actually still funding, taxpayers are still paying for that project. And this is inextricably linked to the 1963. So we couldn't just say, hey, can we just keep the 2002 and tear everything else down? Because as you can see, it's like an octopus, right? So the concept is to keep the 2002 edition in its entirety shown in red, but then also keep the box it's tied right next to. And the majority of the program that's within that box is a gymnasium. Here you can see a photo of the gym, there's a photo of the science labs in the 2002 edition. And then the other portions of the building that we're talking about abating and demolishing are the parts that are, in my professional view, just not a wise decision to renovate. And for example, the McKinney addition. So this is the modular construction that was installed. I think it was supposed to be there for 10 years in 1988. It's wood frame. So this is essentially a temporary building that is going on 30 years old. So we would abate and demolish the 1988 wing. We would abate and demolish the 3-story tower piece of the 1963 original building, and then abate and demolish the band room. We look at this on the floor plan, we start to get an idea of what we would need to replace in terms of what we're demolishing. So here's the red line again, showing the line between the abatement and demolition and what we're going to keep. So we look at the things that we're tearing down. That is the student dining room, it's the kitchen, the media center. So all of these spaces would need to be replaced. There's 4 large classrooms in the shoebox, as well as some offices.
Give us direction, this is north.
Enid Road is right out here.
You've switched directions.
West
Yes,
is up.
I've
is
got
going
it now, I
to-
just want to point out for everybody that we've switched directions.
yeah.
We were, north was up, now north is to the.
To the right.
Right.
As we march up the floors of the tower, on the 2nd floor there are 6 classrooms. And then on the 3rd floor there are 4 classrooms. So at minimum we would need to replace at least everything we're tearing down. We went through a programming exercise with Tim and his team, and this is a draft of the program, but this is taking a closer look at the spaces we would need in a new school building, and then deciding whether those spaces make more sense to be in the addition, so in the new construction, or in the renovation. You see a renovation column and a total, and the addition column and the total. So of all the administrative spaces, and I'm going to move through this very quickly, these are the types of spaces, the uses of spaces, the quantity, and the square footage. We're proposing that only 950 square feet of the administrative function be in new construction, and a little over 2,000 of administrative spaces be in the renovated portion of the building.
So let me point out one thing so folks know in terms of process. So when we did this meeting and went through all of this, it was Tim, myself, Mike, Jack, assistant principal. We had an open meeting in the hallway of the high school, projected this work on the wall, and invited teachers and anybody on staff to come during the day and stop by and participate in and out and in the meeting. And so it was kind of cool the way we did it as part of that process, and we got some interesting feedback from folks along the way.
The academic core spaces, here you can see the majority of the spaces planned for the new addition, a little over 20,000 square feet. And then 6,200, like the engineering lab, performance theater classroom, makerspace, and a health and foundation classroom would be in the renovated area. So we've identified the square footage per classroom, the quantity of classrooms, and again, the type of classroom that would be needed for the middle school, high school. All the special ed, 3 of the 600 square foot small self-contained would be in the new, 2,700 would be in the renovation. We're planning for all new art rooms in the addition, a new music room. The music room would replace the band room that we're tearing down. And then, as I mentioned, the media center, 2,500 square feet of the media center space would be in the addition. Student dining and kitchen, we would need a new student dining room, some table storage in the addition. And our plan right now is to go back and do some renovation of the existing space for your new central kitchen. On the athletic side, you can see all the square footage on the athletic side is in the renovation. So that's this is an example of you're essentially getting all of this for it's there, right? So we're not having to pay to fund the replacement of the gym. And then building services, these are all the custodial restrooms, tech closets, corridors, and we're proportioning which of those would be required in the new and which would be required in the renovation. So we're now starting to size a 54,152 square foot addition that would be added to a 36,747 square foot renovation of your existing area. Part of the conversation along the way is to consider the opportunity for performing arts. And we met with a performing arts group, a working group, representing different programs in the village. And it was discussed that kind of the most appealing option would be a black box theater option. So not a fixed seat, sloped floor, orchestra pit, proscenium, fly loft, stage right and left, not that kind of space, but more of a flexible, multi-use black box theater. So we took a field trip up to the Turner Black Box Theater in Springfield. I just want to give you kind of a visual of what was described from the committee as their preference. So this is all flat floor, demountable seats, and just a pipe grid up in the ceiling for lighting to be rehung and repositioned easily, and then a simple catwalk system that surrounds it on the second level. Here it is from up top, so students could come up to that catwalk and reposition lighting, and there's just a lot of flexibility and versatility in a space like this. There's some curtains for variable acoustics, being able to kind of fine tune the absorption and reflection. So I want to give you a visual picture of that before I hit this next slide, to give you kind of a visual framework of what that programming looks like. Mario, next slide. So this is that option, that black box theater option of about 9,000 square feet, and this would seat 300 students in retractable bleachers. And then there'd be room on the floor for the balance of the student population. So this would be the size of space we would need to essentially have all the school be able to get together for performance. And then some support spaces, the lobbies, the catwalks, control rooms, etc. So this is an option we're going to be talking about tonight, is that performing arts piece as an option, and you can see its size, 9,300 square feet. Mario, let me kind of introduce this, and then I'll turn this over to you. This is essentially the same thing that you saw. So we took the programming Excel sheet, turned it into bubbles that are to scale, and then started to lay out what we call this a program diagram. So of all those new spaces, of the 52,000 square feet of new construction, how big are those, what were the size, shape, orientation, how could those come together to meet the program? And here's our red line again. So everything up here is backfilling and reusing existing space.
And north is still to the right.
North is still to the right. Need to add a north arrow in this.
Yeah.
That would
She
help
needs her
me,
card
I need like.
Either that or keep it the same.
Yeah, keep it the same. So let me walk through the items that we would be reusing and repurposing in the existing building. Starting with the gymnasium that's there, the stage, keep the multi-use PE room, the locker rooms can be renovated. These are 2 art rooms today. We thought they'd be excellent maker spaces. Your building has no storage, so a central receiving location with central storage and a workroom for custodial staff. This is a classroom for performance and theater. That might be right adjacent and next to, this is the addition for a potential new band room, some storage spaces, a little bit of the administrative function, and a secure vestibule. The balance of administration, things like guidance counselors, OT/PT, would be here in green. Engineering would stay put. And then your current science labs, we're thinking would be excellent type MH rooms. So the special ed rooms, a restroom, shower, special ed room, a health and foundation next to it. And here's a portion of your existing plan that we were proposing to renovate into a kitchen, so we can still have access off the back and into that kitchen, into the new serving area. Mario, I'm gonna...
Can I borrow your
Yeah.
pen? Thank you. Thanks, Mike. So I want to just kind of point out a couple things that Mike didn't share, but this, so the vestibules, so there's a reason why the administrative offices are way over here instead of maybe right here, you know? And that's because the existing building is basically right here, and you have to be how many feet away from that?
You want to be 30 feet.
It's going to be 30 feet, so this is basically 30 feet right of the existing 3-story structure that exists. And so the vestibule is essentially, that would be the main entrance, and for those who aren't familiar with what how vestibules work in schools, most schools, I think, probably built since, I don't know, what year, Mike, you have these in them?
Columbine.
Okay, so yeah, basically, these are basically glass entryway kind of structures, so you kind of have floor-to-ceiling glass structures so that people can see in and out of them, and you walk into the vestibule. Usually you have to buzz in when you're in the vestibule to go into the office, and then they buzz you into the office, and there are clear windows here so that folks in the office can see into the vestibule. They go into the office, they have to go through the office in order to go into the building, and so that's kind of an extra safety precautionary measure that we don't have now. Within our schools. We do have a buzzer system, but we don't have that extra added element that most schools have. And I think our teachers would definitely appreciate having that addition within this structure. These administrators' offices, I think, are big enough just to really house probably the principal, assistant principal, the main sort of lobby area of the high school, middle school, as well as the secretarial staff here. And then you go in, and this is where it would be like a counseling suite. Could also be a spot for lots of the office space that we have a need for drastically. You can ask Tim some of the horror stories in terms of office space, and major challenges we have right now in the high school as it is are significant. The AD's office would probably stay around the same area it is right now. That's our athletic director. And then this performance theater is a current classroom. I want to clarify that. It wouldn't be an additional classroom, but it is a current classroom now and would essentially stay that way in this piece. The makerspace, I was told recently, and maybe somebody that's here right now could share that if you were a graduate of Yellow Springs High School or are aware of this, but that this was somehow an AutoCAD program somewhere, or an auto shop. Is that right? Does anybody know if that's the case?
That's where there was the buses were partially in there, and then Phil Lemkow had like his physics lab, and he sort of did like essentially what Mr. Blything does.
Really? So we had buses parked in here.
Yeah.
So that's why people felt like it was sort of a garage space, which is interesting. So it might lend itself really well as a maker space for us in transition. So we would essentially move the maker space from out here in the bus garage, give it a more proper place in here where we could put a lot more equipment in.
Inside bus garage.
It's in the inside bus garage right now. It's the old football locker room when we used to have lockers. Football. We would, not locker room, the old football weight room when we used to have football was out here, and since we don't have football anymore, Jack Hatter, as a result of a PBL project, decided to start to build projects out here with his own tools. And so it was really cool. We were able to clear out all the equipment and consequently do some amazing things out here now. But that doesn't do too well in the winter. And so moving it indoors and adding more to it, I think would be pretty powerful for our kids and a great opportunity to do some of that work here. Locker rooms largely, and this is all going to be used pretty much the same way, bathrooms all the same way, engineering space the same way. We think, so we talked a lot with Jody Chick specifically about this area. Actually, when we talked to her, it was this area here that we talked about. She thought this was a great space potentially to use for her classroom, and as well as she thought she could use this space, and then this space could be used for related services like therapy room and a chance to really, so it's kind of really connected, which would be really nice. But when we looked at it again, Mike and I, we said that's way too far away for our kids to be, especially a lot of our kids who are here a good portion of the day sometimes. And so we felt like we wanted them closer to the rest of the classrooms and where everything else is going on, so which is why we decided to just make this switch. And the other piece is, if we do decide to add the performance space option, it would be nice to have a makerspace scene shop here. So then you could just easily, move things in and out from scene shop to performance space pretty easily. This is currently a health foundations class, so we keep it that way. This is currently a teacher workroom / dining room for them, as well as another classroom. It would all transition and change into the kitchen serving area. So this is where the current outdoor courtyard is. And this is a cool concept that Mike came up with. Is what if we just put it'd be a cheap thing to do, it wouldn't cost us much money, put a little stage here essentially that is both indoor on this side and outdoor on this side. So the notion could be is that you could have a stage out here and a stage in here, and it's not a high-tech stage or anything, it really truly is just a platform and maybe an opportunity to project things onto a screen or things of that nature. To really sum this up, I want to kind of highlight a few things here. This model is very different what you see in traditional schools, where you see long corridors like we have now, very narrow corridors, classrooms on both sides of the corridors, lockers on both sides of the corridors, and when lockers are open on both sides of narrow corridors, it becomes very, very congested and challenging for kids to walk in the middle of them and on top of other challenges. This represents a different model, and so in addition to that, what you see in very traditional schools is, so a whole corridor area like this maybe might be all science or all social studies teachers. So you'd have 3 or 4 social studies teachers for the entire building would all be in one space right here. And then you'd have your language arts teachers in one space over here. And then you'd have your math teachers and science teachers in one space over here. And so in theory, the high school kids would have to go here for social studies, have to go all the way over here for science, then have to go here for language arts and their other classes. And so the problem with that is space matters, and facilities and the way they work matter quite a bit for instruction. And so if you have teachers in completely separate spaces from the rest of the curriculum, does that encourage or discourage multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary work? Well, the reality is it totally is a disincentive for transdisciplinary work when teachers in classrooms set up in such a way that you have separate by subject area versus teams. So what we're doing right now, and I think what most research suggests about what the future of education is looking like, is that kids are going to have to work increasingly in teams that they're going to have to be able to solve complex problems in teams and in groups, and they're going to have to work on doing that. And so what they're finding is that in 30 years, most people aren't going to have a single job in one place. They're going to be going from project to project to project, working on many different project teams. And so we want to prepare kids for that world and that reality that they're going to be working in. So what this does is it solves a number of problems for us that we have right now, and I think it gives opportunities for the future of education that could last for a very long time. So each of these areas could be considered like a team area. So right now we have a middle school team, which is a 7th and 8th grade team. And on this diagram, and by the way, I want to stress this is draft. So it is a first look at this, strictly for the sake of trying to figure out what the budget could be. This is going to change, maybe radically, maybe a little bit over time as we engage our community, as we engage our kids, as we engage our teachers in this process over the next 6 to 9 months, or actually a year, because even if and when the levy passes, then we have several months more of design work to do beyond that as well. So again, this is a draft, and this is just a first crack at what could potentially happen. So let's assume for a minute then that this is the middle school area where all the middle school kids have their classes in this area right here. And so it creates a team environment where the kids are together a lot and they go to classes all within this area. Now this area right here, it's kind of open, and all 3 areas are what's called extended learning areas. And the idea is you have a bunch of tables set up here so that kids can then work on project work that they're doing in all of their classrooms right here and extend that work into the extended learning area. So they're working on whatever it may be that they're working on in the classes. Any kind of interdisciplinary work that they're doing, any kind of group project they're doing, anything collaborative can be done here in this space in addition to the classrooms. And what's cool about this setup is each of these classrooms, because they don't have lockers against them, now have glass walls so that you can see from the classroom through the glass into this learning area clearly, and even into the other classroom, and maybe even outside the building. So there's clear sight lines all the way through to the outside, and a blending of the inside environment with the outside environment, encouraging our kids to learn by doing and getting out of the classroom and really going and exploring the world outside of the school even. So it really makes the walls of the schools more permeable and allows for much more learning to happen outside of the school and outside of the traditional classroom as well. So it gives options. So in theory, you could still have a very traditional system, just like we had in 1965, where you have a teacher in this one classroom with kids in rows, still lecturing in a very traditional way, and nothing will change. The doors would close, everything would be just like it is right now. But alternatively, you have an option where the doors could open, and kids could be working out here while also working in here. Teacher could be in here working with a group of kids, be able to look out here and see what's happening with these kids out here, while these kids are doing the same, these teachers are doing the same thing in these classrooms as well. These small little dots right here called SGs, those are small group rooms. So in theory, if a group needs to work on a project that, or whatever, that has, that they want it to be more of a quiet setting, let's say they're working on a presentation and they really need a quiet space to do that in, these could be quieter rooms, a lot like you see in a lot of libraries nowadays, where they could do that there. You could, in theory, put TVs in these rooms or screens with projectors so that kids could, a group of 4 could be working on their laptops and the same common document, project it onto the screen here and then work off that document together, or do presentations to each other within these small group spaces. And these are just simply things that aren't possible in our current environment. And it could be a very powerful opportunity. What we didn't share yesterday was the opportunity potentially to even put accordion walls if we wanted to, or garage door walls they have nowadays between classrooms if we like. And if teachers felt like that was a good idea, where then you could even open up those spaces too, so that groups of kids could work in 2 rooms instead of just 1 room. So let's say the social studies teacher in this case and the English language arts teacher are working on a project together. Well, they could just open up their doors here and the space out here, and the kids could be working in this entire area and go in and out of each space to be able to work. And if the very next day they want to close them up and make them traditional again, they could do that easily. So the key here is flexible use of space. We're not talking about open classrooms, we're talking about flexible classrooms. And I think that's a key difference and distinction. So the lockers are actually right here in the middle. These little white lines right here essentially become lockers. And what it does is it just opens up these walls right here so they're much more transparent. one of in schools that do this now, one of the criticisms and the questions that will undoubtedly arise in Yellow Springs and arises in schools where this happens frequently is, well, if you have windows outside of these classrooms on the interior walls, and kids are going to be distracted when they see kids out here working or walking by, is that going to disrupt their learning? And we have actual objective evidence now of what actually happens in those cases. And so what people we've talked to have said, and Mike has talked to, is that usually for a day or so, it can be a little bit of a distraction, but after a day, the kids get used to it. It's not a big deal, it's just business as usual. They continue to work, and I saw it myself in classrooms I've seen that have done this in many places, and just recently in Bethel schools, at Bethel High School, where they have some space like this as well. This is a teacher dining room area right here, connected to the media center. This is sort of an interesting concept about the media center and the student dining room, where you have these open spaces where they blend into an open media center area. So the notion that libraries are all in these enclosed buildings is no longer valid. Because today in 2017, right here in Yellow Springs High School, kids walk into our library and check out books without a librarian there now. And so we are allowing our kids right now to walk into the library, check out books without an adult there, and they do it, and they're honest, and they check them back in when they have to, and they take care of it, and it's not an issue for us at all right now in our high school setting. And even, what's not happening, I don't think, at the elementary, but it is happening at our middle and high school. And so, and if I had time, I'd show you pictures of schools across the country that have this idea of a blended sort of media center that blends out into the greater open area. But that's something I think we could do, which would be a really interesting concept. And then that area blends in then with the student dining area right over here. So you have sort of this open space here that can be used for multiple uses, and on top of everything else it's used for. This is a central area where we have restrooms. So these would be kind of middle school restrooms. This would be more high school restrooms. This could be the 9th grade team here as an example, along with the 11th grade students as well. This could be the 10th grade team here, along with senior students being housed here in terms of lockers. The other cool thing is we know that what's happening right now and what's going to continue to happen is increasing personalization with juniors and seniors in our high school. A lot of kids out taking classes in the college environment and other places, and having all kinds of different plans for their learning that are different than students that are in younger grades. And so those kids need a place to be as well. So it could be, in theory, if I'm going off to Wright State and going down to Wright State over here, and then I come back to school and my next class at Yellow Springs High School starts at 11, but I'm back in time at 10:30. Well, I want to go somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I might go to this extended learning area and hang out and study for a little bit before my next class starts, and then just kind of come right over in here. And that's not going to be an issue or a problem, and it's something that really allows for flexible use of this space here for kids to interact one way or another. This could be a great presentation space. It could be used with, you can put screens here where, again, kids can project, teachers can project things on the screens, kids can project projects and work they're doing on the screens. It could be curated space for kids to put projects or art that they're working on here as well in these spaces. Really just gives us opportunities to use this space very differently. I like the patio ideas right here too, because what it allows is for kids to then go outside and work out there as well. And so it really kind of put a real true blending and opening up into the natural environment outside of the school here as well that just doesn't exist today. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I guess I'm ready for any questions from the board at this time around this.
Well, Mike, you seem to have another slide.
I'm sorry, we're not done yet, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say there's another.
So there's one more slide, but actually, this is probably a good stopping point, and then the next slide I'll create another discussion.
Anybody? I have some things.
Go ahead.
I saw
I'm so really
this
distracted
yesterday.
by the fact that there's another slide, so you go.
I saw this yesterday, so I feel like I have a little time to sort of soak it in and soak it up. So, a little concern that came up from one of those slides about our engagement process was, the opportunity for residences. That kind of comes right into that area, right? And I don't know how much, and I don't know what that would actually mean, but I'm just a little curious about that. I mean, we haven't made any decisions about that, but, a big topic and one issue that several people have run on through the this election process has been affordability and so forth. So just in terms of that, you know, and I know this is a draft and things could be turned and whatever, I just want to put that out there. One thought I had was sort of not entirely removing the learning courtyard, but, you know, wondering, since there is so much glass and openness throughout the whole news section, if we really need that. I mean, it's a beautiful courtyard and it brings in light and openness and stuff. But, you know, just in terms of thinking, yeah, thinking about the residential plot possibilities, you know, what we could do. Of course, there's that building that will be still in, that might cause some, inhibit some of this. But anyway, just, I don't know anything about buildings, so just some ideas around that and concerns about, you know, how that eats into that space and if that's something we are considering seriously.
And which plan again was the
So that would,
This was many slides ago.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm trying to remember, was
So
it
it
an
would
A
be-
or B or a C thing that was with?
It,
I don't know, that was.
so turn that slide 90 degrees counterclockwise and imagine the school as it is now.
I
There-
get that part, I
right,
mean,
so
I'm just
there-
trying to remember which,
I don't know that was an actual plan, I think it was.
No,
It was a plan
sketch
where K-12 came to Mills Lawn.
yeah, that's what I'm
That's where
asking,
it
that's
was.
why I'm asking. I think that's the way I remembered it, but I totally could be wrong, because there are a million of these, and we've been juggling them for months and months and months, but that's what I thought, was that was a piece of
Well,
the
I
plan
think
that
it's,
we're not talking about anymore.
I think it happened to be on that slide, but there's still a considerable
Okay.
parcel of land
Okay,
to the left of even this plan, which
Okay.
extends further south than the current building does.
I'm just bringing that
Yep.
up as an idea, nothing has been decided or talked about or anything, but, and you know, the idea of more light if we needed it, there's solar tubes that have come up in different conversations and so forth. The other piece I want to talk about, which is this piece around, you know, kids moving more fluidly and flexibly and the building being really adaptable seems like a no-brainer to me, just because I see it in action in these confined spaces, and I can only imagine opening it up, how much easier that will be, having seen it at High Tech High, having seen it, you know, all over the schools in Indiana years ago. And it makes me aware, and when you're talking about lockers, and up at the STEM program in Springfield, they have open cubbies. I'm just really, really aware of how, like, this engagement process that the students are really in the midst of. You know, how much it empowers them and how much it creates this sense of accountability and responsibility, just in terms of taking ownership of their projects and their education and sort of their futures and stuff. And so I just feel like, and witnessing that in, you know, their use of power tools and stuff. So it feels very exciting, and, you know, besides feeling like we're thinking about the future, I'm thinking about these students and what's happening in their lives currently and how much more we're seeing in terms of engagement and ownership and responsibility. So that's what I get for sleeping on this for 24 hours.
And so
I also just want to toss in, if it isn't obvious, and I don't think it was said explicitly, we're now down to a one-story building, so everything happens on the same floor.
no elevator.
Yeah, so there's no elevator, so we go from a three-story kind of ship of doom to one story with this.
Everything would be fully ADA accessible,
ADA
no need for
accessible.
stairs.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the square footage right now in this design, does it accommodate like our current enrollment, or take some projection for potential growth? Does it accommodate growth? Well, that's one question.
I mean, I don't know,
Wondering
Mario,
about-
maybe you can hit this. I mean, you can easily, I mean, the size of the classrooms are 810 square feet. Easily could accommodate on average 25 students per classroom. You could put up to 30 in each classroom. Additionally, This would accommodate growth because if you actually add the number of classrooms we're showing here on the plan compared to what you have today, there are more. We picked up things like the makerspace, we picked up some new areas in here. So my hunch is, I can't put an exact number on it, is this would accommodate more students than you have today. The other thing I would mention is, it kind of speaks to itself on the diagram, is how expandable that diagram is. You can envision each one of those neighborhoods easily being able to kind of grow. And just to comment, Aida, on your point, this is a diagram that's very kind of extroverted, connected to the landscape, open to the flat green fields and the trees beyond. This is probably not the diagram that maximizes land for sale. So that might be another option to explore.
So Sean, I just also want to say that we did get an enrollment projection finally from the Facilities Commission. Though it came out sort of, I think finally towards the end of the academic year, so it may have flown under the radar screen, and if I recall correctly, their projections are that we stay about the same.
Yeah,
Whatever that's worth.
I do remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I was just curious
Right.
whether it was designed to be exactly the same or if there was flexibility if we could.
It was designed for the same, and I think you could accommodate more kids, you know, and I don't, we looked through this carefully. I don't know, Tim, if you want to say anything, feel free to jump in as well.
Sure. We actually just did a slow walk through every teacher, every content area, everything that's taught, just kind of matched it up with the bubbles that are up there. And, it really got to be, one for one, but it's kind of it would offer the same programming short of bringing makerspace in some of those pieces.
Well, let me ask a follow-up, I guess. I was just thinking about general growth, but so this would not necessarily accommodate, based on what I'm hearing, or maybe I'm hearing this wrong, a 6-12 model. If we said, you know what?
That's a great question.
That's something that districts are moving towards, something we've just scratched the surface of talking about, but
I can speak to that if you like. Yeah, I don't think it accommodates a 6-12 with current setup where every teacher has their classroom. If we wanted to do a 6-12, we could do it, I think, but it would require that there would be a lot of traveling teachers. In other words, what would happen is people would pop into different classrooms. You wouldn't have your own classroom, it would be your own dedicated classroom. I don't think that'd be possible if we had another grade level in at this point. The other thing to think about is, so open enrollment's fluid. And in theory, we could add or not add open enrollment each year if we'd like. So as an example, this year we didn't increase we intentionally did not take any new open enrollment students at the high school. And consequently, how many are we down at the high school? I think we're down like 20 kids total at the high school because we didn't take any more open enrollment students than we had. And the reason we didn't take them is because we felt like the growth we had last year at the high school was just almost too much, I think, for our faculty and our current staff to handle it. It was a lot of growth. In 1 year, I think we grew like 50 kids, is that right?
50 students.
50 students and didn't increase our faculty at all. And so that was turned out to be a real challenge. And so we didn't take any more open enrollment at the high school, middle school level this year. So you could do things like that potentially to help fluctuate enrollment over time. So
this is, sorry, I don't keep dominating.
No, go.
This is just more a comment. I'm really, in listening and watching and seeing what you've done, and Mario, you explaining the approach to learning. I was always concerned throughout this process as we narrowed down, that we would lose some of our fearless thinking, or we would lose our vision, which guides us to be a district of creativity and innovation. That I'm really pleased to see that was not lost in what's going on up there, that you really sort of embrace that in this iteration of the plan. So I really appreciate that.
I have to tell you, Sean, I think that to me is, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. And I think it's I don't want to look back in 10 years and say, we spent money on a project as a school district that ultimately didn't yield the benefit we felt like was the future of education, what our kids really need for the next 50 years, 60 years. Mike says buildings will last 80 years. 80 years, of work, given the materials that we're planning on using, I think, in this facility. And so we want something that's going to last a long time, and that's truly transformative and makes a difference in the lives of our kids. I think this is one idea of what could make that happen. Now, this is a draft.
Yeah.
I think we really want to engage our kids in a project, a PBL project around this, our high school students, and really get them to give more input over the next 9 months or so. and our community. And so it's going to change, I'm sure. But this is a good starting point, I think, for the discussion. And certainly we need a starting point for programming purposes, so we have an idea exactly what our budget would be, so that we can go to the voters with that budget. So this helps design that budget, and so any other planning and shifts and changes we make would have to obviously stay within that budget over the next year or so. So I want to point out that this budget is $18.5 million for this project, so slightly over 18 million, with everything you see here. And if you're ready, I'm ready to move on to the next slide, I think.
Really quick.
It almost looks like a paw print, right?
Yeah, it does.
Do you see the?
Yeah.
Maybe the-
I see the terrier.
I think it looks like a whole dog.
Terrier.
Yeah.
Wait till you see the next slide.
Yeah.
Then-
Wait till you get to, so imagine that terrier, and wait till the next slide.
Are the students only coming in through that vestibule, or are they also coming in through those other side entrances?
So I
North
think
entrances?
typically what happens is the school decides on opening up a few doors in different places for kids to come in, so they wouldn't all come in through the vestibule. There'd probably be a few other entrances in other places that would be part of the design where they'd also come in.
Yeah.
And you could, in theory, open in all three main entrances over there on those sides. You can open up an entrance on every side of the building if you really wanted to, for kids to flow in easier. So, and then what happens is typically systems are designed so that when school starts, the doors lock. You know, and then at that point, the only way to get into the building is through the vestibule.
Okay.
You ready for the next slide?
Yep.
Here's where it gets complicated.
Oh.
All right, so it's that terrier.
Yeah.
And so we've added.
It's not a terrier anymore, or it's like
Or
a,
a pocket.
it's like a something else. Okay.
So we added here a black box theater in this element, in this design, and included in it were a few storage spaces. The lobby's a piece of this. There's some restrooms that kind of go on the end of this mechanical space. That's changed a little bit. Everything else over here, though, is exactly the same, and everything else throughout the rest of the building is the exact same in this diagram. So the only new things you see are really just this, and the lobby, and then the black box theater here. Now, complicating things is it does not meet all of the needs that we heard from folks from the theater, from the performing arts community for a space like this. So it doesn't have a green room, it doesn't have a rehearsal space. There doesn't have restrooms outside the main building. What were you saying, Aida?
Well, storage and building spaces for sets and.
Scene shop.
Scene shop. Well, we think this could be a scene shop. It's just not connected to the building, so you'd have to wheel it around. Everything that you use, you'd have to go back and forth from here to here. And then the storage issue, obviously, there's some storage here, but it's not probably enough to adequately really meet the needs.
And either way, it's still not finished out. It's a shell.
Yeah, it's a great point. So this is purely a shell too. So I don't know, Mike, how many dollars you incorporated into this design for?
So it would be a functional, operational box, but for example, the black box theater in this budget we're showing wouldn't have there's a lot of variable dollars you can spend on a lighting system, a sound system, theatrical rigging equipment. But also some of those things can be nice donor opportunities too, for people to say, hey, the box is there, we'd like to privately fund finishing it out.
So we're thinking, yeah, we'd fund the box here, and this gets you from 18.5, I believe, to 20.8. So it's a significant lift beyond the $18.5 million to do this. And it would go from, I believe it was, so it's a little bit different dollar amount, so looking at the annual. So from $14 a month per $100,000 home value, I believe it was.
And then $3 a month.
So another $3 a month per $100,000 in home value. The income tax would not go up from 1/4%, so that wouldn't change. But what would change would be the millage, and so you'd be paying an extra $3 per month per $100,000 in home value. So, so this is my dilemma. I think, and our dilemma, I think, this is I think an important thing to have for our students and our community. When we had one representative from the performing arts community who was at the meeting last night, and we shared this with her, she said this does not meet the needs of the performing arts community. And so she wouldn't necessarily be supportive of this idea because of that. She thinks it needs to be bigger, more, and provide more of some of those other spaces that are important. I will say that I was one member of the performing arts community, so we'd like to probably talk to some more over the next couple weeks as well. But the real dilemma is, if we do this now, but we're not doing anything to Mills Lawn School, I think that raises concerns for me. The other thing that raises concerns for me is this is just an increase in the dollar amount. There is already an affordability issue in our town, which we've clearly heard from people. This raises that issue even more, and school can function better than it does right now without this. So that's the question, and so I'm really struggling right now to decide whether we include this idea in the proposal I give you next month, or whether we don't do that. So I really just want you to discuss that as well and give me feedback on that tonight if you can.
Sylvia?
The first thing I'm thinking is, like with a lot of this, if it wasn't part of what was put out for a vote now, it doesn't mean it couldn't also become, like the unfinished shell to then be campaigned for to be finished. It doesn't mean if it didn't happen now, it couldn't happen later, or that sort of question.
Yeah,
That's a question.
So there is one more thing, yeah, that's exactly right. There's one more thing I forgot to say,
Oh,
is that according to the,
Well, wait, Mario, are we getting to Dorothy in Kansas now?
yes,
Yeah, so Mike, actually, could you, no?
No, I'll answer your question. Yes,
No,
whatever.
I would like Mike to explain this, because I
Sure.
think you have some better sense of what the actual architectural and structural requirements are that have just been imposed on us.
is
Sure.
this the same as the thing you forgot to say?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Trying to.
Well, we got a preview taste of this
Okay.
last week, or
There's
preview this week.
a brand new code change that happens in November, which is now. So
From the state.
for E-use occupancies, which is educational buildings with more than 50 inhabitants, which we have, we have to provide a tornado shelter for
what?
all, a tornado shelter
Tornado.
for the building inhabitants. So envision we've got 300 some students and faculty. We have to provide a storm
Is it
shelter
enough lifeboats?
for 400 people. And it has to be capable of withstanding an F5, so 250-mile-an-hour winds. So in either plan, right now what we're thinking about conceptually is probably if the black box doesn't happen, we would do it in the band room. We would enlarge the band room slightly, and that's on the outside of the building, where it wants to be. If an F5 comes through and takes the whole building down, you want to be kind of on the edge. So if everything else falls down, you don't want to have this space, say, like right in there, where you cannot be accessed or rescued. So that's a new requirement. We have to have restrooms in there. We have to provide ventilation, emergency power, and so forth. It's in the budget.
It's
That was my
reinforced,
question.
Yes.
the reinforced. thing.
Structurally, foundation to walls, walls to roof. Yes, a bunker.
So I want to suggest this plan now looks like Toto. But I guess I also want to just say, for the record, that, Mike and the rest of us have been moving through various of these design iterations, and this has just dropped on us, really quite like the house on the Wicked Ridge, bolt out of the blue, and the cost of this, right, if I'm remembering correctly, is a tick under $500,000. Is that what I'm remembering from?
Of the bunker?
Of the bunker, the cost of a bunker.
I wanted to make sure I tell you accurately.
Yeah.
289,000
280,
is what's
okay.
budgeted
Okay.
for that.
For the middle high school, for everyone, like all students, all that, whatever, everybody
Yes, in that building.
So
And that's built into
In
the
that-
$18.5 million number.
Okay.
So right there, in the band room, is where we do it.
we'd have to extend this essentially this way, is that right?
No, it's already extended. No windows.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so you can see it.
I was thinking the band guy was fine.
So this is the size of it with the black box theater being the tornado shelter. This is the size of it without the black box theater being the tornado shelter, with the band room being the tornado shelter. It's a little bigger, as you can tell. So that kind of complicates things even worse, if you think about it, this whole issue of tornado shelter as the need for that.
I really don't think that's a driver, though. I think it's just the heart of this performing arts piece, the cost, the value.
Yeah, ultimately that's the real question.
I'm just thinking about this now in terms of the piece being added. I didn't see the dollar, because we went back to the survey earlier with the 18 million, was the performance arts piece a part of the 18 million?
Yeah.
So obviously it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about several
I thought it was,
million dollars.
and then
It's
found out
another,
it wasn't.
two and a half.
2.5 million. As much as I
Give or
value
take.
performance and value art, I always thought of this LFI, like locally funded initiative, was truly funded by some donors out of the community that were going to add to this kind of project versus us adding more to the tax base or the tax burden. I mean, just, how I've always viewed that. And I keep thinking, and Matt, I think you might have been out of the room, poor Mills Lawn, right? Like, what's happening at Mills Lawn?
Sure.
Like, Mills Lawn is off the table in what we're talking about right now.
For now.
For now.
It's the phase two.
And, it's hard for me to think about, funding another 2.3 million.
And basically, essentially a shell of it.
And essentially a shell that
It's not
the
a
arts, that the
complete-
external community really doesn't need.
Right.
So it's really for us internally, and, how much do we really need it, and are there alternative spaces already in town?
Well, we know the answer to that.
Right,
right. I mean,
No. If
and-
you-
Oh, I thought the answer was
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, no, no,
No, if
no,
you talk to
no.
the reps from the different performing arts group, that is a no, that is part of
Oh,
why.
of course, and
Yeah.
this is a no also, well, based on.
No, this is a yes, but it would need more added to it.
Well,
Whereas the other ones that allegedly fully exist and are ready and would be so easy for performance groups to use are a no if you talk to the people who really know about performance. And, there have been representatives from community band, orchestra, dance,
So why are they a no?
theater.
well,
Why are they a no?
The whole Antioch theater thing, I mean, you can't hang lights in there, the building's in terrible shape still. Not to discount the amount of money that went into it, but it's a no, there's structural issues still.
Okay, it's
There's
a
also
no
dealing
because
with
they're
booking
physically
it.
not
Yeah,
appropriate.
right.
And
And
Antioch Big
unavailable.
West is
Right.
physically inappropriate because yes, there's a room with sloped seating and a stage, but it's not a performance,
no, it's a lecture hall.
it's a lecture hall.
It's a
It's not a put on a play or a musical space.
Kelly Hall is mothballed.
Right,
Um, I went to one performance there, but then that's been
Yeah.
mothballed.
So
So,
that's why
you know,
there's that
I fully,
coalition of performance art leaders.
so Sylvia, yes, to all of that, and Sean, while I hear what you're saying, I guess I want to come back to that question. Every year, we sort of bemoan the fact that we do not have a space for our kids to do theater and performance. We've got them in the cafeteria at Mills Lawn. The band performs on a rolled out piece of plastic in the gym where the acoustics are just awful. And so are we gonna finish this project and then say, we still don't have any place to do that? And sort of, I think of this question sort of as apart from whatever other use might get made of it. I think this is a decision we have to make programmatically for what we think is best and what our kids deserve, given how important music and theater and dance are in this community and for our students. That's what nags at me, is we'll get a renovated building with this really creative addition, and we'll still be dragging sets through a cafeteria at Mills Lawn, for the fall play. And that's gonna seem bitter to me.
I think it's important to note that I don't believe this will increase the amount of voters that support us. I think this will actually decrease the amount of supporters that support this right now.
If we added it.
Yes.
Oh, I think that's undoubtedly right.
Because of the cost.
So what you see in that 65% support, I think would go down if we decide to add this.
Because it adds almost a full mill
Yes.
to the property
To the-
tax.
to the
Yeah,
property
no,
taxes.
I get that. I fully understand that. It does
It's more
create.
moves it back to, it's not that it's not important, it's not that it's not needed, because it absolutely is, but it more moves it back to either something later or back to the 100% LFI, even if done in conjunction with the schools versus somewhere else in town.
So I want to add something, I'm sorry, Sylvia.
No, that's fine.
I want to add something to the piece that wasn't shared here for the board for information, which is the cost, we think, of making the actual theater functional once we build this. And I think when we talked to folks at Turner Theater, I think they said around, you could outfit the space internally with everything needed around $750,000, right? But if we talk to the folks that we talked to last night, they were thinking more around close to $2 million. So probably closer to $1 million, I imagine, is essentially what it would cost to really be able to outfit this. That'd be private funding that we try to seek and get within the community to support that. Mike, I just want to make sure this this does not include the retractable seating system.
I would say it's in there.
Okay,
It's in there.
okay. Because that would be even more, and that's why I was just saying. Okay.
This is, this is the dilemma.
And I guess I'd also want to hear more definitively, since there was just a recent meeting where there was one representative of the larger group who you've been consulting with about the performance art piece, who was, it's my understanding, I wasn't at the meeting, I just got back into it today, but it's my understanding that they expressed dismay that it was a more limited black box shell than would be ideal. I guess I'd also want to hear from the fuller group again about that.
Well, how do I want to say this, not utterly impolitically? At some level, it doesn't matter.
It does in terms of the amount of support that could be behind it or not. That's the only reason I'm asking.
I mean, I guess, I'm sure that there are groups, performing groups, who would love to use the space if we paid to have a space for them to use. But I'm not sure, as I said, I think the primary decision has to be for us and what we think is best.
No, I totally get that.
Okay.
I'm on the different square of, that's our main, that is the main thing. The other piece though is, if there's not going to be a concerted effort to even try to finish it out because it's perceived by the performing arts community who we have been allegedly purporting to partner with and even trying to think this through, if they wouldn't be behind it enough to then go out and do what would need to be done to get more money that isn't going to come from us.
Yeah.
That's the part, that's why I was bringing that up.
Right.
I completely agree that the main thing is for us as the schools right now, given what we know. Yeah.
Right.
So what is your question now to us?
I guess I want you to discuss this idea and whether you think, what do you think the best choice is of these two options for our school district going forward? Put it in front of voters.
Do you want a decision or just a discussion?
Sense of the room?
Well, I mean, there's no decision because there's no resolution.
Right.
But I sure would like a sense of the room, so it gives me an idea what to do over the next month and get a better picture of what we can consider for next month's board meeting. I guess I'm feeling like I want to make a recommendation in December. So that's a very strong statement I'm saying now. I want to make a recommendation to move forward at the December board meeting. And I want to make one of those two decisions. And so the question is, which one do we make? And that's where I'm struggling.
Well, so it seems like there's discussion, there's fact-finding, because it's never bad to get more facts from the rest of the performing arts community, but there's still the bottom line of, at this point, if we're having to really say, we're going to do nothing at all for Mills Lawn right now, which completely sucks, in my opinion, then why, for this phased idea, if it were to be the one that you would bring to us to vote on, so that we would then decide whether to ask the community to vote on it, because nothing's happening if the community doesn't vote on it anyway. Why would we put something some kind of extra partnership piece on this when we're not doing anything for Mills Lawn.
Fair point.
I think it's
As much
easy,
as, yeah,
it's easy enough to add something like that later.
later.
If the community is in support of it, if there's, I don't know that it's something that we have to do right now. It's like, do it now or we'll never do it. It's not.
Yeah, the other thing I think about is, you know, if we do this and if the community votes for it in May, without the black box, I should say, if we did this and the community voted for it in May and then it was built, then I think we had some time in the building and folks could see what it looks like and to have a transformative space for our kids. And they could visit it and judge for themselves. Our community could say, was this worth the investment we put into this? And if the answer was yes at that point, then we could consider what is next for Mills Lawn and maybe consider the performance space at the same time. But I think we'd have a better perspective as a community in terms of how this is, number one, impacting my pocketbook, how is it impacting the kids, what this space contributes to the collective benefit of the community of Yellow Springs. And then with that new information, which is some information we don't have now, I think we'll be more informed and we'll be able to make a better decision at that point.
The only thing I'll change about what I just said is I looked over at Matt. I thought the one thing we would be doing for Mills Lawn would be not being down here all driving them crazy in their space twice a year.
Spring musical time?
As a high school fall play and spring musical endeavor, which, I mean, having been a theater parent here for years, I mean, we're all in their space, and it's not even just the space that you come see the performance in.
Right.
It's Mrs. Reichert's teaching room that is the co-ed dressing room. It's, so I take it back that we wouldn't be doing anything in Mills Lawn, because I'm sure people would be happy for that to not happen twice a year here when it really just co-ops a lot of space that's supposed to be for the elementary school.
Mike, I'm going to assume that if this is what Mario presents to us, that you could, that a final design, when you got to that, would make it possible to build that addition relatively easily, should that come down the pike later on, right? Sort of a socket to plug something into.
Yeah, we could plan for it.
Plan for it, right, even if it...
Everything's short of saying digging the footers and the foundation,
Right.
just doing the site work, making sure there's not future sunk cost. Essentially putting a dash line saying,
Right.
future expansion.
This is where it could go. Okay.
So, you know, this of course saddens me because I have spent many hours in theater arts program and dance program trying to find space and so forth. I mean, myself times 60 other people have done this. So it would really sadden me because I feel like it's been a need of the community. But I feel like the stronger voice has been this piece around, you know, the cost of all of this. And that is a, you know, deep, you know, my fantasy of having a performance space, the reality of the money is, you know, the thing that hits me most. I guess, you know, the person who was speaking yesterday spoke with great authority, and this is not to diminish or devalue that. I just don't know how accurate all those figures were last night. So, gosh, would I feel some sadness, more sadness about finding out, well, maybe this could be done for this much versus what sort of the figures that were being tossed out. So,
And that's why I'd rather hear again from the larger group, because there has been a larger group giving input on that.
Well, and it feels like they really would need, I would want them to be sort of a lot of the voice in the community around that as well. I don't feel like I necessarily want to take that out, even though that would be fulfilling a great fantasy for many people. So, you know, I would be content with this because of what I've been hearing from the community. Would I feel like in 5 or 10 years, gosh, that was one of those opportunities we really missed, and we've been talking about it for another 6,000 hours? yeah, maybe, but, I guess a little bit more information would be useful as well.
There's no question that this is gonna be a vast improvement. It's gonna, it's gonna do away with buildings that are falling apart. It's gonna create all kinds of wonderful opportunities. I guess I would just want to press that the difference here is, on the order of 10%. And are we gonna lose an opportunity here? Because I personally am skeptical that it would ever get built in the future, given that I've lived in town for almost 15 years, and I stepped into a conversation that had been going on for a long time about how can we build this thing, and 15 years later, it's no closer to getting built. Lots of great ideas, lots of interesting locations, but, not a penny raised and not, so that's, I guess, what I'm pressing on.
And some, some PBL is expressed performance-wise, and there's
Sure.
really no appropriate place for that here. There isn't.
Two things. I want to say that during that meeting that we had with performing arts leaders, and Aida was there at that meeting, one thing that I thought was interesting is what was raised for sure, even in that meeting, was this idea of affordability. I mean, that group also said, this is a great idea, but there's the affordability challenge we have within our community as well. So even folks who really wanted this space were raising concerns about the affordability challenge associated with this as well. The other thing I didn't say earlier, which I need to say now, and I think it's really important to point out, is this design here. I think it's important to say this is not for project-based learning. Let me repeat that. This is not for project-based learning. This is for the future, what we think the future of education is going to look like for kids. Our current facilities are didn't contemplate the idea of the personal computer being accessible in every place. It didn't contemplate the idea of laptops or the idea of Wi-Fi, in terms of what we do. It didn't contemplate the idea of cell phones and everything we do with cell phones and how that impacts anywhere, anytime learning that's happening right now with our kids. And I'm sure that there are lots of things that are going to change in the future that we can't anticipate even right now. We know artificial intelligence is going to have a tremendous impact on schools. So when we look at this, I want to make it clear to the community from my perspective, and certainly the YS News who's here as well, that this is not a space that I'm considering a PBL space when I'm thinking about this draft design idea with Mike. This is a space that could accommodate PBL, but it could also accommodate what we think is going to be important in the future. And those are some of the skills, like we know kids are going to need to collaborate and work in groups. We know that a lot of the rote learning that's happening in a lot of schools is not going to be the kind of skills kids need in the future. We know that the ability to research and find information and then use it in different ways to solve complex problems on teams is super important. We know the idea of creativity and incorporating that into our work and the project where kids are doing is going to be super important in 20 years. None of that involves necessarily the letters PBL. But certainly PBL has a lot of elements that support a lot of those things that are going to be needed in the future. So I think it's critically important to say that while PBL works in this kind of structure and certainly works better than what we're doing now, this design is not being made, this draft design is not being made strictly as a PBL option. This is being made because we think it's the best setup for learning in the future for our kids, with or without project-based learning.
Okay, I am aware of the time. You cannot eat chocolate again before whether it's your birthday or not. Yeah, you want, yeah.
Yeah, the only other thing I thought of, sorry, I know we're trying to do this, stop talking to things, but the other thing I'm thinking of when I'm trying to, and this piece of it's newer to me only because I wasn't at the meeting where you all heard about it. The other thing I'm thinking about is, it's in a way it's kind of fascinating and depressing that we are going around and around about this so much, when if like a meteor fell on our gym and we needed a new one, we would never be like, oh, well, let's just go for a while without one because it costs too much. And I find that sad and interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
in an arts community, which we say we are, I don't know, I don't get it.
Yeah, well, we haven't gotten it for a long time,
Yeah,
and that's been frustration.
thank you.
And that's been all the conversation, yeah. Okay, thank you both, Mike and Mario.
There might be a few more slides. Do you want to go
Oh,
through real
gosh.
quick?
No.
There are more
I don't think we
slides.
can. But basically, this is just the construction phase if we did this, and I don't know if Mike, you want to very quickly.
I can do this in 30 seconds. So the idea is to limit swing space.
Uh-huh.
So the only swing space that we would provide in this concept is for the McKinney edition. So this would have to come down as a first phase. The students would be housed temporarily in modular
And
classrooms.
nicer trailers?
Nicer trailers, air conditioning. And then we keep the 3-story building and the band room, assuming we don't do the black box theater, operational during construction. The next slide. Then we build this addition and that addition, and you can see now why the office had to be so far away, because we're going to construct this all the while leaving this fully operational
That's
to
very
avoid our
good.
sunk costs. And then the next slide shows the removal of the 3-story tower in the band room, some site work up front, parent drop-off pickup. And we take off the modular classrooms. We have to get back to our kitchen. And voila.
That's a good visual. All right,
Okay.
thank you. everybody, all of you. Okay, we are moving into the personnel portion of the consent calendar, items 4.4 through,
No,
oh, I'm sorry.
Consent
Yep,
calendar.
no, Yep, administrative, I'm sorry. My little arrow took me somewhere else. We are looking at the administrative portion of the consent calendar 4.2 through 4.3. Is there a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
This is any discussion on it?
We want to thank the anonymous donor for the $1,000 as well as Miguel Espinoza again. I think we talked about this last month. This is all going towards the 8th grade trip, and we really appreciate his support of our schools.
And this is from Taco Wednesday, all the
Yes.
proceeds from Taco Wednesday at the taco truck.
That's right. Yeah.
That's the day to go buy your tacos.
All right. Roll call.
Sylvia,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
Aida,
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
Okay, now we're moving into the personnel portion, 4.4 through 4.5. Is there a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I think these are pretty self-explanatory, yes?
Those look awfully familiar.
Yep,
Yes.
okay. Anybody need anything? Any questions? Okay, roll call.
Steve,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
Aida,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Sylvia.
Yes.
So this is a new senior citizens coordinator, just FYI.
Yeah, I'm
Christian
just
Mason.
Okay, board communications. We need to set the time for the December meeting. Is everybody available at like 5:30 or 6?
This would be on Thursday, the
14th. 14th? Who said?
14th. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can do 6. 5:30 I could maybe do, I might.
6 would be better.
6,
6
good.
would be better.
Okay, everybody okay with 6?
6 works for me.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, and then board work session. Many of us are off, starting on Sunday to go to the Capitol Conference, the Ohio School Board's Capitol Conference, which starts this year for the first time on, major starts on Sunday and goes through Tuesday instead of Monday through Wednesday, which is a good change, I think. So, and Dawn passed some tickets out and bulletins out and of course the catalog and.
So I want to share one thing around that. Well, first of all, Don and Steve are both here, who also ran for school board, and I want to thank you all both for running for school board and your interest in schools, and so thank you both personally from me for doing that, for engaging in it in this process. We really appreciate your interest in our kids and our schools. And sincerely, I know both of you. I met with both of you, and I did feel that sincerity from both of you, and I'm glad that you were really actively involved and interested in help making our schools better. So thank you for doing that. Steve, I talked to Steve yesterday, and he is interested in going to Capitol Conference, and so he's talking about maybe going up and then coming back home each day. So maybe before we leave, Steve, if we can just, I know you sent me an email today, I hadn't had a chance to respond, but maybe before you leave, we can kind of clarify and make sure with Dawn and we're all on the same page for you for Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, so, okay?
Great. All right, Greene County Career Center report.
Quiet over there on the hill, nothing much to report today.
All right, appreciate you sending out the newsletter.
Yeah,
That's very helpful.
He does a nice job with those.
Yeah. Okay, other board member items. This is when I was going to acknowledge the two of you because there we are, so glad you're both here. And again, I appreciate that you both put yourselves out in the way that you did. I know that wasn't easy and it hasn't been an easy process, but appreciate that. So far. And any thanks voters for voting for me.
And WAOC?
All right. Okay, and I just need to bring up that this is the time of year we have to talk about board leadership for next year, so just start thinking about it because we'll be discussing that in the December meeting. All right, anything else?
But we're not discussing it now.
Oh,
No, we're
would you
just-
like to?
Well, I was just gonna make a comment,
Sure.
that I think you've been doing an incredible job. So, I think the board has been very collaborative and has managed a tremendous amount of projects and work over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. In your case, how many years? 12 years? But I completely support you remaining in this role, but I think it's really you that needs to kind of think about that and whether you need a break from being in this role or if you're, reelected and charged up and ready to continue to lead us forward, I support that. So I just wanted to kind of share that with my colleagues on the board.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to frame it, actually.
Yeah, that it's really
You
something.
have to meet with Mario a lot more than we do. It's got to be exhausting.
It's his birthday.
Well, that's true, it is, isn't it? Hopped up on dark chocolate over there.
You send him and now you insult him.
All right. Okay, that's that. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved. Second, whatever.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.